Is Carmen on the phone? Do we know if Angel's coming? Okay.
Hi, is it Carmen on the phone still?
Yes, I'm still here.
Okay, is anyone else on the phone joining us?
Do we need to call Karen, but she's not here yet.
Chair Clark, when Dr. Karen Ortiz comes, we'll just make the minutes show the time in which she joins us.
Perfect. All right. Well, then, good afternoon, everyone, and we will officially call this meeting of the K-3 Literacy Ad Hoc Committee for the State Board of Ed to order, and we'll begin with a roll call.
Chair Clark.
Here.
Dr. Foley.
Present.
Dana Burke. Angel Canto.
Present.
Carmen Castro.
Present.
Dr. Cruz.
Present.
Durando.
Present.
Amy Hamilton. Aaron Hart. Dr. McMillie.
Present.
Dr. Ortiz. Audrey Reff.
Here.
Deborah Vickman.
Present.
Member Wellborn.
Here.
All right. Fellow committee members, I want to thank everyone for their work in between last meeting and this meeting and the review of the drafts and things. I did want to just make sure we're all on the same page and clear of what our objective and our agenda and what we're going to accomplish today in our time together. So we are going to review the pages of the recommendations, and my hope and intent will be that we capture consensus, and that the intent behind this is to make sure that we captured the language correctly and the consensus of the group. I understand that some of us may have, well, I think it should be that, but this goal of this committee is to capture the consensus of the group. So please help us with sharing your thoughts and helping us to get to that place on each of the recommendations. And then I would also like to try to perhaps give some guidance on prioritizing some of the recommendations as we move forward to rolling this report and recommendations out. It would be helpful to know from this committee's perspective these are must-haves and these are vitally important, or you can't do this without the other, things like that. So those are our key priorities for today, so we'll be going through word for word, but really on the recommendations. And we wanted to also try to capture what the recommendation is trying to either improve, correct, or fix if it's a need or a gap in the system. So helping us with that language and understanding, and that we're capturing the consensus behind that will get us to, I think, where we need to be on that. Am I missing anything else? And is everybody good with following that kind of as our North Star for today? Great. Any other, and look, we have it in big screen and you have it in front of you. And I just want to make sure that so if I am looking over here and you have something to say, don't be afraid to say, hey, you. Because we want everyone to be heard, but we also have a lot to get done. So with that.
And Chair Clark, we do not have any call to the publics.
Oh, okay. Well, then we can just jump right in. And we're going to start on the line 41, sort of page 2. It's, again, sort of overarching an issue, and then the recommendations. I think let's talk through the recommendation first and then capture if we are correctly sort of articulating the issue that recommendation is if that would be okay. So line 44. And I will just sort of start us off on a simple one that I'd like to suggest on the line 45 of that first recommendation. It says diagnostic assessments and progress tools, and I'd like to include monitoring, so progress monitoring tools. If everyone...
I would agree to that.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, and Heather, Dr. Cruz?
On line 44, if we could just insert the word comprehensive in front of statewide, so a K-3 comprehensive statewide K-3, maybe not assessment system, but literacy system.
Although I do think we were talking about in this context an
Assessment,
assessment
right.
system. The
We could
vision,
be.
it should talk about in the vision section,
Yep.
the
Okay,
comprehensive
I'm good
K-3
with that.
system.
So maybe just comprehensive.
But comprehensive should absolutely be in there. That was the conversation.
Sorry, so we were saying we did intend for it to be assessment and not program in this section? Okay, so we're going to clarify that. Yep.
So in my mind, it would be develop a K-3, a statewide K-3 comprehensive assessment system.
Thank you.
So we can take the one K-3 out.
And take the K-3, right, duplicative.
Develop a statewide comprehensive K-3 assessment system. And you're going to, bear with us, but that's what we're going to do today. It's this kind of intention. So, yeah, Audrey.
Okay, so then with that clarification, looking at the second item on what a system would do, an assessment system would do.
Could you please provide a line item, a line number?
Sorry, 47. Sorry, I'm 49. So ensure early detection and interventions are being implemented with fidelity. I'm not sure that the assessment part of that can ensure that interventions are being implemented with fidelity.
Right.
So I would recommend something more like such a system would provide a mechanism to target state resources for intervention in a timely and equitable manner. But I don't see how the assessment system would have anything to do with looking at fidelity of implementing interventions.
I'm going to just sort of look at that a little bit because I do think that it would provide data that would tell you some things around whether, so I think
Around
that was
need.
right around need
Yeah.
or around gaps.
Yep, I agree.
And I think that was the spirit of what that line was trying to capture. So is there a way to wordsmith this line rather than, because what you suggested is entirely sort of different, and I want to try to...
Well, I'm just, as I read through it, I was trying to sort through how things fit under each of these issues. And so for me, like we're looking at, in our conversations, we looked at using a universal system so that all state stakeholders would understand where we are with early literacy, whether it's, what patterns and trends we see, and that would be important in targeting resources and understanding where problem was more or less and where we needed to really focus. The idea about understanding what's being implemented in classrooms seemed to come more in the conversation around reporting, which I feel like came up in another, may have fit better in another one, maybe in the staffing. Okay. Give me a moment and I can find where I thought that might fit. So I'm not suggesting that we wouldn't want to look at tracking interventions. I just don't know that that's the place to put it.
So perhaps, and this might not be right, but could we say, could we insert your wording of identify needs, patterns, and resources necessary to help ensure early detection interventions are being implemented with fidelity? And
I think that really works better at capturing the full discussion there.
And I would actually, what I did was put that at the beginning, Alicia.
Yeah.
Ensure needs, trends, patterns, whatever, and resources are, put that in the front.
Please don't judge my spelling and my quick typing. I
We're all
would appreciate it.
human.
Chair Clark?
Yeah, sorry.
So I don't know where it belongs, but I think somewhere around here we need to make the case that says, what is the value of having being able to monitor all the way through K-3? So right now we talked about how the state doesn't have the ability to see what's happening until really third grade, and there it's just one little picture. And you don't really know. So it's more than just a comprehensive assessment system, but it's an assessment and data analysis system. So that so it's capturing, if you have one assessment system and it feeds into a robust portal and data analysis system, then the state has the ability to learn and understand learning patterns and successes that can be shared. I know that overlaps one of the other ones a little bit, but I think we have to, because we're facing the local controlled menu-based assessment crowd that I don't think they understand that menu assessment is going to lose the ability of the state to influence progress towards goal. And that's what this is all about, is having the state being influenced that.
So could we do two things in that regard? For me, that was one of the ways we're going to strengthen the issue description at the beginning of the issue 1, is to, once we know what the recommendation, and we've got that solid, that we could strengthen that and make sure that we're hitting that. But if we also need to adjust maybe item 3 to second that, hit it again, it's not just about reducing administrative burden. And in fact, I think that's like one of the last things. It's
that's
really
that's the benefit to the schools, but then it provides better intelligence.
So it's almost two-pronged. It's going to help the state do this and help the local LEAs do this.
Yeah, because they'll get better
and maybe 3 could incorporate both, so it's caught both in the recommendation and in the issue explanation of why we're addressing it. Would that work? Do people feel like that's not going too far off what this group felt was?
Yeah. So, for example, imagine being able to get back when you're using your benchmarks and assessments, you get information back that says schools similar to yours in terms of demographic, size, geography had these kinds of results. So all of a sudden you're like, we're at the pack, we're ahead of the pack, we're behind the pack. That kind of information would be really helpful to know how you're doing.
The piece that I still feel isn't there, and I want to make sure the language is capturing that, is in the previous conversation, the word common was used to have something that is used by all.
Ooh, I would not use that word.
I know, but that was the intent, because otherwise I could make a case that I can use whatever I want.
It is not the same.
Okay. I would just call it a single statewide assessment.
So can we insert that? Does that capturing? I'm not revising history here. This is what we talked about, that important in that K-3 space to have that, especially for exactly the reason you outlined about being able to know where we're at and what's working, and we can't currently do that until third grade.
Yeah.
And it may be that it's in the actual, instead of a fourth bullet, Alicia, it's develop a single statewide comprehensive assessment system. I don't know. It feels like it might fit in the actual wording of the recommendation.
Yeah. Oh, up here. Develop a single.
Oh, sorry, hold on. Yeah, single
statewide comprehensive K-3 assessment system, which includes universal screeners, benchmarks, diagnostic assessments.
Are we veering off? I'm looking at my LEA friends to make sure we're not veering into uncomfortable territory. But in my mind, that's what we were talking about, and that was what we felt was something that was a significant lever.
Agreed.
Okay. Okay. Erin, you had something.
Thank you. Just to add to that, I agree with that. And in looking ahead at, I'm getting a little ahead, but on page 3, that whole issue 4 is this very thing we're talking about. So it's sort of like, can we combine? We're essentially combining these
Use a
two
line
together.
number.
Sure. On page
89.
3, it's issue 4 that starts on
89?
line 89. So that whole section is essentially
Kind of provides the rationale,
it's
maybe?
the rationale. So if we add some of that rationale to this section about having the
Of the
single
issue
statewide
with the
assessment, then those things could be effectively combined.
That's good.
There you go.
Yeah, I think we might just want to copy that and plug it into issue 1, and then
Copy.
from issue 4, line 89 through
90.
91? 90.
So the whole recommendation or the whole issue for 4?
Both of them.
Both of those.
Yeah.
Okay.
There's some additional.
But the issue will go as part of the rationale for
The
number
rationale.
1.
So
And the
if I'm correct,
recommendation could be
I'm-
part of the recommendation.
So I'm copying the recommendation for issue 4, and I'm including it in issue 1 as potentially bullet point 4 for right now. So we're organized.
Yeah, I think we can merge them.
Okay. Let me just
Sound like we have less recommendations, which would be good.
do this.
Can we go back to the word single?
Yeah.
I want to clarify the word single because, sorry.
If we go really fast, then what will happen is I will not capture what the committee.
Tell us when you're ready.
So just
Sorry.
give me a
Hold your
moment.
Sorry, I'll hold it.
Now, from my understanding, you would also like the issue as the rationale for the recommendation, correct?
Just move it.
That,
We can
just move that up to basically issue 1. Add it to issue 1, right?
But as the
As the issue.
issue.
Yeah, it
Okay,
expands
right here?
the issue.
Expands. Okay.
And then do you mean to take line 94 recommendation and through 98 and move it
As part of the
up as part of?
And we can word.
I did.
Okay.
That's bullet
I'm
point
looking
4.
down here. I didn't notice. You'd already ahead of me.
I'm sorry. Dr. Foley.
Going back to the question of single, because single implies to me one test. And we're looking at, as we read further, the idea of a compilation, a comprehensive collection of different types of tools, assessment tools, used. So when we say single, we're meaning what we're trying to capture there, if I'm hearing us right, is the same, that everyone uses the same tool across the state, correct? So to me, statewide was, single means, I was thinking one, but we're looking at a tool that we're thinking will need to be built that doesn't
Right.
currently exist, that will be a collection of multiple tools, correct?
Right.
Okay, good. I'm hoping now that the single to me was like there's going to be I
I
don't
don't
want.
think it's possible to have it be one tool.
It can't be. It shouldn't be.
Right.
I don't want it to be.
But the idea, the
I like the
emphasis,
toolbox idea, though. Maybe you could put a single, quote, toolbox of assessment tools.
collection.
a compilation or a
I'm
collection.
sorry, we're really kind of making things a whole lot more difficult.
Oh.
We really should just say common and bite the bullet. My opinion.
No.
Yeah, I think
No.
you're
No?
getting real
All right.
wordy
You will
when you
light
start
that fire.
putting that
Okay.
like toolbox next to it.
What about common, though?
What is
I would
it?
go with
Why?
common.
Why does develop a statewide
Common.
why is statewide comprehensive assessment system not clear enough? Is it because it's not saying?
Because I think it could be interpreted as, great, I can use whatever I want as long as it's part of the system.
Agreed upon.
So would it be require a statewide?
Wouldn't put up agreed upon.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm sorry?
We're not going to ask.
I'm just
No, what are
playing.
you saying?
I was require a statewide, but obviously it would have to be developed and created. But what I want is it's not just one test. It's a comprehensive toolbox of stuff. So I guess I was just the single part was alluding that it's one. I'm trying to find the word that captures what we're wanting to say without the word single. Do
Single
you see
or
what I'm
common?
saying?
No, I'm with you. I'm like going through my thesaurus in my head. Yeah.
Chair Clark, Dr. Foley, one of the things that I've noticed as our meetings have gone on and we have discussed is the committee has talked about a couple of things. One is they've talked about a single third grade reading assessment that is given at the end of third grade, which is
a separate or single? Separate? A separate
reading.
one test for
one
this
test
purpose.
for reading that is in
grade.
alignment with
Summative
move on
assessment.
when reading.
That would be
right?
part of this.
Which is similar to the AZ merit, but that is what is used to determine whether or not that student meets the criteria of move on when reading. The second thing this committee has talked about is that kinder universal screener, so that we know where students are at when they enter kindergarten.
Well, and I think that universal screener was beyond just kindergarten. It was this idea of a beyond just starting in kindergarten, but to be continued to be used through third grade.
The screener
Which
would
is what we have. K-3 assessment.
Right.
Okay, so then the next thing is when you're stating that to develop a single statewide comprehensive K-3 assessment system, which includes screeners, benchmarks, diagnostic, and progress monitoring, are you making the notion that every single school within the state of Arizona will be using the same exact thing? If you are, that could be an issue because it is a local control state.
Well, we've had that conversation. I think and I'll just be honest, on the conversation, I felt like we were sort of parsing out and saying in kindergarten we'd like a common universal tool and third grade summative. And the rest of the sort of assessment system could be in the middle. You know, you could use something for your progress monitoring and I'm using something different. That was what I thought we had captured, but if that is not, and because I think that would be difficult.
Yeah, I would agree 100% with you. Like, we need that kindergarten single assessment so we understand how students are arriving to school, what needs they are, where those needs are, and then that single test at the end, if we are going to, that's our goal, that's the way to measure our goal, and how have we impacted early literacy by the end of third grade.
So could we keep the line as it exists today with the comprehensive K-3 assessment system, and then in the such a system could we create a bullet that outlines the need for in particular, a common K entry universal screener, and and also clarifies that we're talking about. I think we cover it later, but just to make sure.
Issue 5.
In issue 5, the third grade summative is captured.
I think it would be important to clarify what we mean, because it could be read as though you are going to dictate here what every universal reading screener will be, progress monitoring tool would be.
We want to try to avoid that.
And so clarity would be key.
So maybe not include single, and saying we're building a statewide comprehensive K-3 assessment system that includes, and then clarify in the system would have, and these are those two things are important.
So delete this section.
So,
Colburn.
does it infringe on local control if we have a statewide assessment, kindergarten, first, second, and third, just an assessment? None of those other tools in the box.
Are you talking about a summative assessment?
Sure.
Like end of the school year.
Sure.
Somewhat could be used formatively.
I get uncomfortable because that is not what we want to do in those, necessarily in those, especially K1. But again, I look at my LEA.
So let me ask, because I was understanding that there is value in seeing the progress for third grade. So is there not value in seeing how students are moving along? And I thought we had a discussion point to say that we're learning too late. We're finding out too late where the kids are before we can do anything. So my thought was we wanted to get some input along the way, so that a couple things. One is schools have feedback that tell them, are they growing fast enough, so that we can do more interventions and special resources earlier.
I hear you, and I think you're absolutely correct. I think this is where the language matters, and for me, in my mind, you can get some of that reporting and that trend analysis and that data from the progress monitoring and the benchmark and things, and that the summative, even in K1, one, I don't know if it's really developmentally appropriate, and two, I'm not sure it would tell us what anything more than what the progress monitoring and benchmark data would already say. So that was sort of because we want to, and I guess that's the other question is, do we want to insert the word developmentally appropriate to,
I think that'd be important.
Yeah.
So I hear you. It's just at a certain point, how do we do what's best for kids and not create a system that doesn't actually give us what we're looking for? Because that, for me, the important trend is how are they coming in, and as they move along K3, are we making progress? And multiple tools are going to have to tell us that. Not one tool is going to be able to do that.
So
That's why that comprehensive.
So what? Okay. So what is the mechanism by which we get outcomes along the way? I mean, I know this is happening at a school level. Do we want to have this at a state level so that we can identify schools that their children aren't growing fast enough, so we can say, we've noticed this in your data. So
for me, that comes in the data analysis around the progress monitoring and the benchmark data from their
the
plan.
Portal.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
It's reporting.
I mean, if I'm
reporting those progress monitoring.
Yeah. Well,
right now
we didn't
don't
really spell
utilize
out
them.
in our recommendations here the real work that needs to happen around that portal so that it's much more user friendly.
Actually deliver on the analysis.
And I think the clear thing we need to say here is that none of this counts towards your letter grade. All this stuff we're suggesting for K through 3 up until third grade. So the K2 is really intended as an assist for schools in the process.
It's best practices. It's evidence-based.
It's just
what
feedback.
It's what research and science has shown is effective.
It's assessed feedback for schools to try, and that's part of what we consider as best practices. There needs to be more feedback along the way so we know if we're making the progress we need at earlier grades.
Right.
Okay. Thank you.
I have a question.
I want to check in. Are we okay in capturing, or you want to wait until we hear? Go ahead.
I just have a question. So when we're talking about the developing a common entry-level kindergarten screener, is this like we're keeping, because most of the districts still use like dibbles. Is this like keeping dibbles and this is adding something on?
I think it would be then the process is up to the state board as far as, you'd have to go through the full procurement and process.
So it could change that. I just want to make sure we're not like adding yet another test on and
That's why I'd like to see the word developmentally appropriate in there. So again, we aren't just
relevant.
Relevant, yes. That's a good catch too. Can we do that? Add developmentally appropriate, or like there's just some principles in here that we're not just saying.
Could you give me the line, please?
What's that?
Can you give me the line based upon the screen? The screen.
Line 44. I'm thinking it's develop a we might come a developmentally and relevant.
Look at
developmentally appropriate.
Look
Sorry.
at her 44 though, because it's moved.
Oh, I have to get my glasses on then. Oh, I see.
49, Terry.
A developmentally appropriate and relevant K-3 state comprehensive assessment system.
Right.
Line
For this
60?
one?
Oh,
Or you can add a sentence after tools that says this system needs to be
developmentally appropriate and relevant to
students.
Students' progress. Yeah.
Repeat that, please.
System needs to be developmentally appropriate and relevant to student learning.
Well,
I'm looking.
Chair Clark, members. The reason I enter relevant is sometimes the screener is used inappropriately, so I'm trying to identify that if you're using a screener, it be used for the purpose it was developed.
Yeah, I think we all agree with you.
Mm-hmm. So I'm just trying to make sure there's some language that identifies that. And if relevant's not it, happy to. I agree on something else.
So, Chair Clark, members of the committee, look at number 4 and look at number 6. Can we delete number 4 and use number 6? So you're looking at line 61 and you're looking at line 66 on the screen.
Oh, she didn't.
See, I think we could, I would posit that we can let 4 go.
Yes.
Is there anything in 4 that you feel is, we need to, because we can put some of it somewhere else. But 4 seems to be a duplication of the overall recommendation.
I don't see issue 6, do you?
Just moved it up from another spot, so that's
Issue 6?
I've got
It's not on our paper at all.
I've got issues. It is. It's in a different.
Chair Clark, Dr. Cruz, it is on your paper. It's in a different section. But the paper in front of you is what I sent out. And so as we update it, you'll have to look at the screen.
I don't have it.
Oh, yeah.
We don't have it. For real.
Dr. Cruz, what don't you have?
That wording in the document you sent out, we can't find what line it's on.
Correct. 95?
It was under,
95.
It is on page 3.
There we go.
It starts on line 94,
Yep.
under issue 4.
number 5.
Yep.
95 to 98.
It's 95 to 98, Terry, on your
We already
document.
changed that. We already moved that.
Yeah.
Yes, and we moved it up to this one.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
I'm
think
good
it's
with losing
redundant.
all of
Okay,
that.
so I
And now we
think
can
I'm
delete
seeing
it?
consensus on taking 4 out. I'm seeing consensus.
Yes.
Yeah, we had moved
Yes.
it up.
Yeah, it was redundant.
Nodding heads. All right.
So if on the papers in front of you from the handout, if you want to cross out issue 4 and the recommendation for issue 4 on your paper, because we've crossed it out up
Put it
here.
somewhere else, right? Thank you. Audrey.
Okay, so.
And then Aaron, and then Kaya.
Couple of things. I'm still looking at number 2 and still not feeling like it's exactly what we want to say. So line 55, identify needs, patterns, and resources needed to help ensure early detection. And I would insert effectiveness of interventions being implemented. I still don't see how a state assessment is going to address fidelity of implementation. More.
Agree.
Okay, thank you.
Does everybody else agree with that?
I do agree with that.
Okay.
I agree.
Okay, and then the last.
Can you let her do it first?
Can you just repeat it real
Sorry.
quick? Just
Sure, detection and effectiveness of interventions. Get rid of R and just,
Right.
Yeah.
Being implemented.
and then get rid of with fidelity.
oh my gosh. Oh, JK. Okay. Woo.
Undo.
Okay.
Being implemented.
Being implemented with fidelity.
Or being implemented.
Yeah, I think the idea of what's happening with interventions in the classroom just doesn't fit under the statewide assessment, except as a way to measure the effectiveness of what's happening. And then can we just scroll up to so the issue statement that we cut and pasted.
We're going to wordsmith that after we get the recommendation lock solid.
Yeah, we just need to come back to that because
Gonna
I'm
come back
feeling
to it.
like the
I
cut
made it clear. We're going to
score.
come back to the issue because it's until the recommendation is final and we say, yes, we're good, we're not going to touch it anymore. I think then that's when we make the case in the issue statement, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Because we could fine tune it and then we're going to change something and
Perfect.
then we're going to have to go back and fine tune it again.
Appreciate it.
That was my thought, so I hope you're okay with that. All right, Aaron and Cayenne had something.
Thank you. Chair Clark, I would suggest, so starting at line 52, we have the series of 5 things. Item 1 and item 3 are rationale, whereas 2, 4, and 5 are actual recommendation. So I wonder if we just need to just position them differently so that maybe the rationales together is a part of the recommendation, and then items 2, 4, and 5 then become like they're the recommendation.
I don't know if 2 is a recommendation, is
I
it?
think, can I
Or, do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
Like,
but I
Can I suggest that you raise a good point, and I think number 2
is actually going to be.
I think we've over wordsmithed it. What I think the intent of number 2 is to say the system would do more of what number 1 is. Number 1 says we're going to have baseline data for the entering kindergarten. And then number 2 is the same thing, but we're looking at it at the other grades, first grade, second, and third.
Can we just make 2 part of 1 and
and
simplify
really
it a bit?
the whole idea is to yield baseline and progress data so that we can facilitate identification of need and provide
resources.
state support and target state resources.
Yeah.
Member Wellborn, one more time, please.
Okay.
Yield baseline and progress data.
Yield baseline and progress data for all students, all K-3 students, so as to facilitate early identification, intervention, and the application of additional resources. Is that it?
Maybe instead of
The
application,
need
it's
for additional
targeting
resources.
and the targeting of additional resources.
Baseline.
It's so hard to do
I think targeting makes us understand the point of the baseline assessment. If we're not targeting, if we're just going to say we need more
That's
resources.
why I sort of feel like instead of application, if we use targeting, it might make it a little bit more. But
targeting. Yes. Okay.
right.
Yes.
And then would we be able to eliminate number 2? Or do you feel there's parts of number 2 that need to be added to 1 to clarify?
Eliminate.
Chair Clark, if we added something about the early detection, I feel that is important, and it's not.
What's the difference between detection and identification?
Well, yeah, I see your point. Early detection. Mm-hmm. Okay, that's fine.
Do the part about enabling the department to provide supplemental supports, do we need that
No, I think it's duplicative now.
codified anywhere? If we're
I
going to take
think you
2
would
out,
need it
I think we
codified
want to take
somewhere.
that and add it to 1. That's enable the department. The last part of on page line 57, the enable. Can we move that
Maybe that goes to issue.
To the end of 1.
to the end of 1?
Yeah, we'll add it.
Add
It's
it
a
to
long
1.
sentence already, so
We'll
make
it a
second
separate sentence. This will enable the department to provide supplemental services where needed.
Chair Clark.
Yes.
Just as Alicia is typing, on number 1, should we, and I'll throw this out to the group, yield baseline and progress data and have robust data tools available? Because we're kind of trying.
I don't know what that
and I think
means.
that's the second point. I think the second point is to talk about enhancing the portal system.
But that's in another part, isn't
Okay.
it?
Yeah.
Okay. That's why I throw it
Yeah.
out.
I think that's a good
I just
point.
don't want to
Put
forget that
put a pin in
reporting
that.
piece.
Put a pin in that, and let's make sure that we capture it on the other place.
Like
But
the dashboarding
we don't want
and
to
all that
break
kind of
this
stuff.
recommendations back by adding so much in, just because we haven't gotten to the next ones.
Okay.
So
Thank you.
don't let us lose that. But I
Okay.
think it is important in another part where we talk about the portal. All right. Is everyone okay so far with these changes?
Sorry, probably want to move on from this, but how important is it that we're talking about also continuously looking at the effectiveness of the interventions that we are suggesting and promoting? Is this connected with this common assessment, or is this not connected at this point?
What line? I'm sorry.
So the same thing where it says, so as to facilitate early identification, intervention, and targeting additional resources. do we want to get into effectiveness in this area of our recommendations and how we're tracking and looking at effectiveness, or is that somewhere that would come later on?
Member Ref, can you elaborate on what you mean by effectiveness?
So in the where we just removed
In the
line
previous, in
57,
92, we had
in
that.
the previous version,
She's basically
we talked
pointing out.
about that this statewide system would allow all state stakeholders to do all of those things, to identify where the need is, to keep an eye on the effectiveness of this K-3 program, you know, in line with the interventions that we are recommending that are in policy that we're supporting, and targeting interventions. To me, it does all three of those things.
Yeah, so it provides better information to stakeholders.
Yes.
Monitoring the progress and effectiveness of the literacy program.
Yes.
Write that.
After the sentence about ADE on line 56, you could say this will also provide.
Or it could be a separate, it could be a number 2.
I don't know if it needs to be, but we can make it that. Information to stakeholders.
Valuable information to stakeholders
about
stakeholders looking to assess the effectiveness and progress
of their literacy program.
Of
literacy program?
Of the literacy
state program,
yeah.
I think, because the whole point is to do something statewide, right?
Mm-hmm.
State program or system?
In this instance, it's actually...
Or it's actually policy, really.
Well, it would be, I consider Move On when reading a program within the system. So if we're talking about... Would you not?
Statutorily outlined.
Program.
I would think program, because the policy sets the program, but we're really looking at the program to inform the policy potentially.
And Chairwoman Clark, members of the committee, I'm just going to throw this curveball at all of you. So when you look at number 1, you have develop a statewide comprehensive K-3 assessment system, which includes okay? That is in conflict with 4 and 5. Here you are saying that a statewide comprehensive, which includes universal screeners, benchmarks, diagnostic, progress monitoring, that's already in statute. I mean, it's already required that the schools do that work. But then here for number 4, we're recommending that there is a common entry-level kinder universal screener. I would think that the committee means that this universal screener for kinder would take the place of any other universal screener that a school would be issuing to the kinder students. And when we look at number 5, it's a 3rd grade summative reading assessment. Just thinking that 1, 4, and 5 are kind of all conflicting and very...
They're not.
Actually, they're not.
They're not, because we're talking in 1, in the recommendation, we're talking about this is the system we have to build. And then in the breakdown of the system you're defining the components that are necessary. That's how I was looking at it. Member Wellborn and then Audrey.
So I'm confused now. Regarding Director Williams' point, state law already calls for schools to have universal screeners, all these components in their early literacy programs. So I thought this first recommendation was about saying that there's going to be a statewide one, that there's going to be one statewide assessment system. And I don't know if that means that it includes universal screeners, benchmarks, and diagnostics. I don't understand. I'm getting lost in what are we saying? Are we talking about assessments or components of or a literacy program, which they already have?
Here's my point of view, and please, anybody else. So right now, what the system is, we have a statewide K-3 assessment system that includes universal, but we're talking about a comprehensive assessment system that then would delineate these things, and one of them would be a common kindergarten and a common third grade summative as things that everyone would use.
I would suggest we we enhance the system. Because we already have parts
So
that's
I think develop
built.
is maybe not the right word,
Yeah.
which
Yeah. So we're talking about
Right.
enhancing what we have.
building on and enhancing what exists that needs some unification, because you're
statewide.
Currently-
would that be accurate?
Well,
I mean, I don't want to
Currently, people are using, they have,
multiple things.
we use the term comprehensive, but we all might be using a different tool, and within that comprehensive, the only common part we have would have been the Easy Merit assessment. So it sounds to me that we were talking about adding the kindergarten as a requirement, like the third grade. But my wonder and hope would be the opportunity, if we were going to build something like this, that we build an entire repertoire of resources that LEAs could opt in to use parts and pieces of, maybe in addition to or in place of their current ones. Is that
opt into is a key word there.
Right. Well, key to a certain point, but not so key that it
Doesn't get used.
delineates, that it basically diffuses, and
It's not an
we don't get
option.
the unified kindergarten or third grade. So do we have a line in the sand? I'm looking around at everyone, because if we don't, that's fine, and we can argue that through. But it sounds like we have,
Chairman Clark.
those are islands of sanity.
The K
But
and
you're
the
not
third
thinking
grade.
that the system would only have a kindergarten and a third grade test. You're
No.
thinking it would include
Right.
screeners and progress
And
monitoring
that is where
tools.
they have some
in
a
addition
menu of
to-
options.
But you're not saying in this, everyone thou shall must use this, every component of this, but you're saying in this, everyone must use the kindergarten and the third grade. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes.
That's what I think.
I want to, and if there's pushback, that's fine. This is what this committee is for, to say that won't work, then let's talk that through. But
I think that the word enhance is really well used there, and I think we can clarify some of this, because really all we're doing is we're saying keep this in place, but this new enhanced system, so line 50 at the end, if we just entered this enhanced system needs to be developmentally appropriate, relevant to students' learning, and include, and then bump up the statewide common entry-level kindergarten and the statewide common third, like bump that up.
take
That
4 and 5 and make them
might-
part of the recommendation.
Repeat that.
This enhanced system needs to be developmentally appropriate, comma, relevant to students' learning, comma, and include, and then bump up lines 65, 66, and 67, and 68.
You're going to
So bump this up.
Yeah, for
Yeah. And put
Okay.
it at the end there.
Oh, man.
So can I throw a little wrinkle in, Chair Clark?
You can.
So I just want to throw a little wrinkle in the sand here, just because, why not? So you realize now, this is almost no different than what we have, other than you've just added on a third grade screener, or a
No,
kindergarten screener.
Kindergarten and
I mean, we can ask them to report out, except that you're still not looking at apples to apples along the way.
which is what Member Wellborn's point was earlier.
That is, and I'm not saying that it's developmentally appropriate to have a summative assessment at the end of first or kinder, but you do have a progress monitoring tool that you use with kids to say, where are you at now in relation to everybody else and where you should be, where the target is. So we still don't have an apples to apples system. So we're putting all this work into this, and we're so worried about local control that, I mean, I just want to say, have we really lost sight of what is right? I'm not saying that district schools, charters can't use different materials, different instructional strategies, different interventions, anything they think is right for their kids. But there has to be some type of common kind of little benchmarky formative measure at the end of wherever you want to put it. Put it in the middle of kindergarten, put it in the middle of, I don't care where you put it. But there has to be some kind of commonality along the way. Otherwise, you still are no closer to your goal.
So may I add, I think the word I heard Chairman Clark say was unified, and maybe we would think of that in place of the word common. So you have these choices, but there are two unified tools that you're going to use.
I'm arguing against that. I'm saying there's 4. There's a kindergarten universal screener. There's something at the end of kindergarten, whatever that might look like developmentally that's appropriate for kids. And we would do that through some kind of robust scope of work and go out and all of that as part of this. Something at the end of first grade and something at the end of second grade. And then we do the big test at the end of third grade. But you have to be able to see, and then the system, you'd be able to pull metrics out to say, how many first graders are on track? How many, ACT kind of does this, right? So you test an ACT and they say you're on track for college readiness. You're on track for this. They did that with the test in 8th grade that they used to have. Are kids on ramp? Are they ready to go if they continue in the same vein that they're in now? So I just want to throw that out, that we're doing all this work and you could open up the legislative process and you're not really going to be any closer to your goal.
So I think we've got 2 ideas in this first recommendation, and by combining them, maybe we've confused it. So one of the ideas is to enhance the statewide system such that students are assessed every single year. That's not the language, but that's sort of the idea. So it's assessed at kindergarten 1, 2, and 3. So we have that. That's one idea. The second idea is around including these universal screeners, benchmarks, diagnosis assessments, and all that stuff. Those are another realm of tools that we can discuss whether the state needs to be involved in that or if that's truly more local control issues. Because I think all we really care about is assessing them at the end of each grade and determining where the progress is appropriate or not.
And can I add on to
I'm
that?
let Karen, she's been waiting patiently, and then Dr.
Member
Cruz.
Clark, members, I don't disagree with what Dr. Cruz has mentioned. When we talk about assessing only at the end of first or second grade, we're missing the appropriateness of informing the instruction along the way. And so I'm of mind that there are assessment tools out there that act as informing instructional practices, which are best practice, that will give the instructor, the educator, the opportunity to gauge individualized learning and to appropriately intervene within the time before that student is assessed at the end of a grade, which seems a bit punitive to me. So in identifying a menu of assessments, I thought we were going to the point where we were looking at what was both appropriate for instructional strategies and learning, and also for informing and collecting data uniformly. And right now we seem to be going back to a plethora of assessments that are not going to get us to a positive outcome, both on instructional strategies and student outcome.
All right, wait. Did you have something? We have someone on the phone, I think, that wants to chime in, and I apologize if we've been ignoring you, so please.
No, this is Carmen Castro, and I know this is very hard to do over a conference call, but I just have some concerns about adding additional assessments as far as common screeners when we already have a robust assessment system that benchmarks students along the way and allows you to progress monitor. It seems like it would be an additional tool that we would have to administer and not have the ability to progress monitor on that screening.
I just want to clarify. So from Member Wellborn and what others have said, including Carmen, think of this, and I think we should think big. This system could actually replace what districts are using. If somebody's going to pay for that, think of those funds that a district could then reallocate to other things that they would not have to pay for. They wouldn't have to opt all the way in to use all the tools, but if we had that available at a statewide level, they certainly could. and that would free up funds and be in lieu of. And all of these assessments that I am referring to would be in lieu of what people are doing, in place of, not in addition to. Nobody wants more testing for any kids. We want to try to minimize the testing for kids in that kind of environment. So if we were to able to go out and build this kind of system, think of it as a value add that districts could actually reallocate funds back into their general fund and to other priorities.
Well said. All right, Audrey.
My question, though, is why, I mean, we're at a place where a menu of assessments has been passed in legislation. So why do we think we would have success with a menu in K-3 when...
I'm not talking about a menu.
Why do we think we would have success with a single assessment when we have direction to go to a menu of assessments? Like, how is this going to be received? It seems to be
just to
completely
clarify,
contradictory.
the concept of menu assessment is that a school would pick a nationally recognized assessment, and everyone in that school, every grade, takes that assessment. So, and that's what then is supposed to inform A to F. Mm-hmm. I think we talked about earlier the notion that we wanted to pull the reading monitoring thing away from A to F, mm-hmm. so that it's much more used as a diagnostic tool and be more help. So I think we need to be careful about the menu of assessments conversation versus what our hope is with these changes, is that it's not part of A to F. And I think we didn't really say that, by the way, here, that this intent is to have the reading piece as a separate standalone test, because right now we use the whole ELA test and we take a little subcomponent and you get a yes or a no. Right. And we're trying to improve upon that. Yes.
And that was, I mean, part of our thinking and some of the conversation captured at previous meetings was that we have a third grade reading progress goal, we have a retention policy, we have move on when reading, and that we can make the case that because of that, we need to have this unified system that may not follow the same path as other grades are on the menu of assessments. I think that's how we were going, and to your point, capturing that will be important.
I just want to say I agree that the way we were talking before with having something at the end of like kindergarten, the end of first and the end of second, that's more in line of being able to tell us whether they're going to be passing the AZ Merit or ACT or whatever it is. The screeners we do need to do, and that's what the DIBELS or the progress monitoring, that's what drives our instruction. That's what we look at. Those are the little formatives between that we can adjust and tweak and do what we're doing to help the kids get where they need to be. And then at the end, we do something that will tell us, are they going to be ready for third grade passing that test? And then that's what can determine whether we send that letter home to the parents or not, because that's apples to apples. Exactly. Whether the screeners, the progress monitoring in the middle really isn't comparing apples to apples in the end. So to me, that's what I would rather determine if a child's going to pass that test in third grade or not, and inform parents on that. But throughout the year, we are using the screeners to adjust our teaching to get them there. And then also, as going to the point of having, the state being able to look at, have it in the system for it to be able to look at, that if that would be kind of like on the Azella line where we can look and see where the scores are. At the school level, when we get a new student in, it would be so nice to have something that we can look and see, this is how they're doing, so we can just go and we can take them and do what we need to with that student instead of having to start over again and retest and figure out where they're at. So I'm really liking that suggestion.
However,
Audrey.
So what's coming to mind now is if we have a summative end of grade assessment, because of my grave concerns about how the third grade assessment is used to make placement and grade decisions. I'm concerned that we can see some action in the future where decision makers are using, state decision makers instead of local decision makers, using end of kindergarten, first grade, second grade common assessments to make test-based grade placement decisions, which I would think would be highly inappropriate. And you'll hear more on that later. But when we talk about developmentally appropriate, there are many things to be considering in how children develop, and I would be very worried about that misuse of this assessment.
That's a good point.
Is there, in my non-educator mind, I understand that the thing we do with the kindergartners, you call it a universal screener. It's sort of figures out where they're at, right? Is that what that is? And then the third grade thing we have now is an assessment. So a summative assessment. So is it better to use a screener at K1 and 2, and then say third grade will be the assessment? Does that serve the purpose of what we're talking about?
Heather, you go ahead, but I also want to just be careful because there are things that are in statute already.
And we universally screen everybody. We're
And
required
it's not
to,
just K.
and not just kindergarten.
But
I'm just trying to address what Member Ref said that about the idea of calling an assessment, and it's not intended to force statewide decisions. It's intended to get us to understand what progress is made based on where they started. So maybe it's just a different kind of tool than the summative assessment tool. And I'm not the educator.
I'm going to let you talk, and then we're going to.
And we got to decide.
We got to move on. So go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to concur with Member Ruff that I think everybody on this panel would agree. You don't want that to be made in a high-stakes way, used in a high-stakes way. I think we could utilize some guidance to help guard against that. And also, I think Member Wellborn brings a good point up. We're not going to call it a summative tool. It's not summative. It's more of a formative assessment. It's more of where they are right now.
And it was not formative.
No, but I mean in grades.
I'll call you out on that one.
In grades K1 and 2.
It's still a progress tracker.
It's a progress. Where are we in relation to the goal? And we do this all the time with benchmarks in a district. We do things like that all the time. So really helping to reset.
That's what you're talking about. Don't call it an assessment. You're right.
Right. Call it something else so that everybody kind of gets the look and feel of what it is meant to do, the purpose, and how we use it as guidance moving forward.
To the inbox at azsb.u.
Member Wellborn, anything else?
No, I was just going to suggest that we simplify our language to say that we're going to enhance the statewide assessment system to provide a universal screening in kindergarten, additional progress monitors in grades first and second. So enhancing it is those three things. The third grade piece is already there.
Right.
So let's focus just on.
And then what happens K2?
Yeah. So let's just focus on K1 and 2. That's how we're enhancing the system. We're bringing those things in.
I think the issue is the third grade test is still there, but that third grade test is going away, and it's not an ideal test. And I think the idea was that if we had a test just for this purpose, it would be nice if those other tools would give you feedback toward that final piece. Mm-hmm. I think what would be important for us to note is if we are not recommending that it would be a comprehensive tool that we're using for all of the universal screenings for all the grades. The part about the part about
I think it's on the table is that we are recommending that.
Okay.
So if we're not, we need to. Do we have consensus on that? Are we move people in that direction, or are we still on the fence?
Because my thought would be, if we're not doing that, then the idea about it reducing, because people would be entering that data in anyhow. Yep.
So, do we have some consensus on moving more to the a K-3 comprehensive system that would include delineating universal screener for the early grade, and I think we'd want, what I'm hearing in the conversation is we would want to identify that we're not talking about a summative assessment for K-3. We're talking
For K2.
K2.
Yep,
Right.
okay, 1,
Right,
2.
but for third grade we
Some
are.
kind of ongoing, right.
Sorry, that was really clunky the way I said it, but I'm just trying to like get the.
We can wordsmith it if we have
Right.
consensus on that
I-
idea.
But I just want to like.
Chair Clark,
break
Dr.
everything
Cruz,
down.
I would rather have a sentence that the whole group,
Yeah.
because
I'm just
this
trying to
group has
get-
changed numerous times, the documents that have been sent out,
Yeah.
and so it's very difficult for board staff to get
Right,
something.
that's
we
why
are
I'm
now?
saying it clunky right now, so we can
So a
wordsmith the
statewide,
sentence. But if we don't have consensus on that, we might not as well wordsmith.
So
It's not
a
K2, it's 1, 2.
so,
No, it's
so
really
we're not
K2.
doing
No,
a,
it would be
K
K2.
K through 2.
In addition to the universal screen.
Yes.
Okay, sorry.
Because that's
So-
at the beginning.
It would happen at the beginning,
Yep.
and then some sort of
Great.
at the end of the year
Yep.
in K1, 2, and then
Get it.
3 would be your
Okay.
summative
Right,
end of year.
exactly. I like that.
Benchmarks.
Benchmark is as good a word as any.
do you want to call it an assessment?
Instructional strategy piece along
Well,
the way.
Authentic assessment?
Well, I wonder.
we say
is-
that?
I
'Cause
wonder.
that would-
Are they
that
monitoring
does.
tools? Are those K2 pieces monitoring tools? Are they your?
That's what I would.
I would say
That's-
progress
to me,
monitoring.
That's what I-
monitoring tools
Is
is
different
a little
than
bit
benchmark.
different than a.
And an assessment. It
And because
feels-
it's along the way, it's kind of like
Exactly.
I wouldn't want you to replace something like Dibbles that we're doing at least 3 times a year and progress monitoring along the way with something that we give just at the end of the year.
Chair Clark,
Right.
could I just recommend that, Sean Ross, can we just do a refresher of all the names of the different assessments that are out?
I think we're okay.
No? Okay.
Just because we are really behind, and I think we're okay. And I just want to capture before people lose their thought of this. We know sort of the different components. We cannot interchange, and benchmark does not mean the same as this and that, and diagnostic is not the same as universal. So we're trying to be really clear. So let's try to capture it, and then we're going to walk away from it for a little bit and go to the next recommendation, and we're going to come back. Because sometimes you just need a little
break.
A break. Yes.
So is that
Number-
is number
Oh,
3
sorry.
okay?
I
A
put my glasses
statewide
on.
K2 end of year benchmark progress monitoring tool.
Take
Member
out
Clark.
benchmark.
I
I
don't
would-
think take up.
I would take out benchmark. Would everybody agree?
Yep.
Yeah.
But, Member Clark,
And
members,
is it an end
may
of year?
I
or is it
also,
progress?
it's end of year again.
Yep, I would say progress. I would just say a K2 progress monitoring tools.
Tools,
We can
right,
define it later when.
right.
When it's what's hard is that the tool doesn't exist yet, and so we're trying to take this concept on something that doesn't exist yet. So I think that's the hard part. But we're trying to
And
get
you
the
have
function
it already
Right.
that we do progress monitoring 3 times a year.
right, and don't take that away.
Don't lose that.
Yeah.
No, we need that.
Okay.
Okay.
We'll let people read it, and we really are going to walk away from it for a little bit and come back.
I think the last item on number 4,
Not at the
the whole part about, it says, provide data to educators to inform instruction, and that's a concept that applies to this whole thing. Maybe it goes back up to the number 1 on top of
Yeah, the overall
1. So the whole intent is
Yeah.
that
period. After 3rd grade, I'd do period, and then, yeah, provide data to educators.
that somehow goes up in the top one.
Yep.
Member Clark.
Member Ortiz,
Yes, Member Clark.
while she's
number
making this
2.
change, hold on.
Number 2, a statewide common entry-level kindergarten universal screener. I'm concerned that a screener could be interpreted to be too limited and be used for just certain elements, and it's not a multi-diagnostic type of tool. would someone either make me feel comfortable or explain it?
I believe that looks different than your ongoing. I believe that is sort of your baseline piece, but I think your ongoing progress monitoring tool would be your more comprehensive, appropriate piece.
Okay.
I think that's your baseline.
Okay,
That you
so
then have. I would
follow it
if
with
I'm
that?
developing if I'm thinking what this would look like, it would have that foundational baseline piece that we would then continue to monitor and go deep. Progress monitor and monitor in that K2 monitoring pieces, whatever those are.
Okay, but the universal screener would be multifaceted. It wouldn't just be for developmental type of delays. It would be comprehensive of issues related to appropriate school.
I would hope so.
I hope so too.
I would say that we would want to make sure that again, the tool doesn't exist in its
right now.
There are parts and pieces of what we've seen that we think we would want to include, right?
Sometimes language matters a whole
lot.
Yeah.
So then we have
So that would be in addition to doing the already dibbles.
Kind of a baseline.
Baseline, get where they're going, and then throughout the year we're doing dibbles and progress monitoring.
Or
That would be
something.
up to you whether
It's
you
different
do
than a
dibbles.
diagnostic.
It
It is different than a diagnostic.
I think that's what we have to understand. Universal screener is
Right.
the first thing. Diagnostic
Correct.
would be the second, and we are not
We're not limiting it to
right
the second. Okay.
in my
I'm going to
mind.
paste back in.
I just
I
don't
think
know where.
we're not-
where I'm supposed to paste
It
that.
goes up at number 1 someplace, either before that, right where you are now, or at the end.
Well, try here.
Okay, so this system.
It will provide data to educators to inform
Yeah.
instruction and intervention strategies, and then this system needs to be developed. I think that's fine.
Yeah.
All right, we are going to move on. You'll get a chance to look at it again, but we're going to keep moving.
Wow, that was peaceful.
Just number 1.
The other ones are going to be a walk in the park.
Yeah.
That one was
That one was the
biggie.
tough one.
That
That's
was
why
the
we put
biggie.
it first. All right. So line 74. Remove the language within. Move on when reading to allow A and B rated districts to submit literacy plans every other year. So
And on your paper documents, if you're looking at, that's page 2, line 54.
yep. Yes,
Chair
Member
Clark,
Cruz.
I would maybe just reword this a little bit, just to be more explicit with the fact, because we've kind of taken the contrary approach in the recommendation, just to say that we would like to require all schools and districts to report each year. This allows us to. Allows everybody. I mean, we can wordsmith the rest, but
Maybe it's
you know,
amend
to,
the language.
yes,
within
it is.
statute
It is amend the
and
language
require all.
and require all A and B districts. I would say and require all districts to submit literacy plans every
You
year.
want to say districts or LEAs?
I'd say LEAs and charters.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
So you're going to amend the language within the move on when reading statute. To require?
To require all LEAs and charters to report literacy plans every year. And then you can capture the other part down and below. So I'd get rid of this allows. You can you reword that to say why.
Can you give me the number, please, Dr. Cruz?
Line
just saying
70,
delete.
like, get rid of this allows in line 76.
Yeah.
And then in 77 through 79, we can rewrite that language as to why. This This removes the variability of data and allows us to compare best practices across LEAs and charters from year to year in order to support those that are not making progress.
Slow down.
I know,
Orly, she's
sorry.
going to have a heart attack. So she just really just added, this removes the, and then she kept a lot of your sentence previous, but.
Yeah, I did.
Said in a much more positive way.
Yeah.
Right. It's not the contrary.
Allows us to identify, was that,
Allows us to identify.
take that part. Yeah, there
Yep.
you go. You got it.
Effective. There you go. I like that. That'll work.
Just the idea of trying to group write a paper with a bunch of literary experts. Who thought of that idea anyway?
It's so much fun.
Chairperson Clark,
Yes,
just
sir.
one minor suggestion: literacy plans and data. Just
Yes,
that way, it's
thank you.
required
Yes,
for
I
both.
was
Thank you.
just
Thank you.
looking at that.
It's good.
Great suggestion.
Dr. Cruz, you're going to have to repeat that because I had to delete it in order to copy and paste.
Okay, good. This allows, I don't know, but I can't remember what I said now.
That's okay. I will listen to the audio.
Okay.
How about that?
Yep, perfect. I think of
course,
like
you know-
this allows to this removes the variability in the data reported, and then your sentence allows us to identify best practices and share those with those that are struggling.
Well, specifically, the best practice of the most successful schools.
And it's copied on that clipboard for the
Yes,
old one.
compare is fine.
Mm-hmm. It also allows us to see where all schools are in relation to the target and the goal, as opposed to every other year.
Progress to the goal.
I could go on.
I don't think we need much
Yeah.
more than that. I
Okay.
think we've justified the recommendation. And
Good.
unless anybody thinks we're missing something, we're going to keep moving.
We got through too quick. Check.
We're going to hit some more bumps in the road. Don't worry.
3.
Everybody okay? Alicia, are you okay? Mm-hmm. We'll come back at the end and review. Okay, so moving on to line 82 on the screen and line 59 on page 2. Audrey.
Can I make a recommendation that line 82 through 84, actually, I'm not sure that is best fit there, and that maybe that would be better fit in the recommendations from issue 5, where we're talking actually about cut scores and retention.
Chair Clark, member of, with all due respect, when you talk about adding language, you're talking about the actual statute, which is in relation to these recommendations above. It's a change in the actual law, whereas the cut score is a state board decision, so that's more like
So in
rules
theme,
or
it might
policy.
fit nicer where you're saying, but in actual where there's 3 different places in statute these things live, and we're trying to keep them so that we're talking about the same statute area. And the cut score is not actually in statute. That's the state board sets that rule. So let's not get bogged down on placement yet, because I'm not sure we're there. Is that okay? Let's worry about language right now.
Okay.
Is that okay?
That's okay.
Okay. Is that okay, everybody over this side? Sorry. So let's look at the language of line 82 or line 59, depending on what you're looking at. And this was, again, an adjustment on, or just, again, to look at almost the exemption area and sort of that. A question in the field had been that we needed clarification on limiting the number of times a student can be retained by the 3rd grade. Dr. Cruz.
I'm just wondering if we should be, I don't know, a little more prescriptive there and say that a student we want to recommend a student may not be retained any more than one time due to the Mauer piece. I think that's what we would all want. I mean, we don't want them retained at all, but they, I don't say we want to say they can be retained twice because, when they're in little and K through 3, it doesn't show up as much. When they're 16 and in 8th grade, it becomes a little problematic.
And this
so
is
why don't we just say that we
K3, right?
set a limit on retention to 1?
That's what I'm advocating that we say.
Let's just be clear about that.
Right.
Just
Doesn't
that
go-
a
yeah, it
student
doesn't
may
go
not
past
be
third grade.
retained
Prior to the 3rd grade.
more
prior
than
to the
once.
3rd grade. So in theory, it'd be twice, possibly.
Yes, by the end of the 3rd grade.
I'm reading the room because I
Yes.
want to make sure we're all clear on this because that is a different and I'm seeing Audrey. So Audrey, I'm going to let you talk. But the idea when you say
To once,
to once
Alicia.
is prior to 3rd grade.
So
And
it
in
stays within
theory,
the Mauer
If
statute.
they were identified in 3rd grade to also be retained, then that in their K3 experience, the limit would be twice.
Oh, I'd say once.
No, that's the difference we're saying.
Yeah.
So,
And I don't know if we have consensus on that, so I want to hear.
okay. So, and I apologize because I'm still not clear on how this needs to be discussed in what order, but I am,
Just focus on this language right here.
this language right here. To me, the recommendation would not be in, setting more exemptions or less exemptions based on a test score. It would be a recommendation to conduct, and I'm just reading my own notes now, to conduct a thorough review of the research on the effectiveness of the intervention of retention. This is an intervention, and we're called to use evidence-based intervention that includes a cost-benefit analysis in order to advise on the continued use of retention as an intervention for students, including a careful review of the research base on the effectiveness of retention on students with disabilities, English learners, and students who have already been retained once in grade, in order to make recommendations on the application of retention going forward. And I know that was very wordy, but I apologize if this is not the right time to produce or to intervene these comments, but I don't feel that we have in any way satisfied our work to make recommendations about exemptions to retention without having considered the evidence base for that intervention and the cost for that intervention really at all. And so I'm very, very concerned about digging into, maybe it should be 1 year for this or 2 years for that, when we've not looked at this intervention of retention really at all.
Thank you, Member Ref. So I think in my mind, I'm hearing two things. One, you're talking about the validity or the effectiveness of the overall retention policy that we currently have in statute.
Correct.
And I would say that some of that, my hope would be, is the further exploration when we have a portal and some of the the helping to beef up the data system so that kind of research analysis can be done. That to me is where that goes. And then to your point, and I don't know, I know I said it, I just don't know if it actually belongs in there. I don't know if that's it's not a new exemption, it's a clarification around that. And if what we're saying, and if we agree with Member Ref, we don't have enough information to be able to say that we think 1 or 2 or none limits on exemption in K3, then that's what we need to discuss. Is that okay?
Yes, I think we need to be very clear that we believe that this is an issue that requires very careful study, very careful parent education, very careful cost-benefit analysis. And we're talking about, the reason why I thought it would fit under cut scores is because we're talking about applying this very costly, very much lacking in the evidence intervention to more students potentially when we talk about increasing cut scores, applying it to more students with a very confusing and complex assessment system. So wherever it's appropriate to talk about it, I have very serious concerns.
And the process of the of discussing the cut score, which is another part of this, we can talk about the language around that. But I think for this is, do I have consensus? And Dr. Cruz and then Member Wellborn on this limiting language.
Well, I just want to address that, kind of in a big picture way. I don't think any of us disagree with your recommendation, Audrey, that we should absolutely study this and look at all those things. I could advocate that we make that another recommendation. In the meantime, because you're not going to change this tomorrow, I think trying to put in here that we limit retention only to once kind of gets us a little further to that goal, to say we try to limit this to one, try to get that into statute, and then we also say direct this group to do thorough research and analysis on the blah, 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 what you just said on retention as an intervention strategy, as another recommendation.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I would advocate for.
Can I get just some clarification? Do we believe this has to be a statute change, or is this a potential board rule change?
Which one?
Go ahead.
Limiting of
I don't know.
retention.
I think it's a statute change. I don't think it's just trying to get you.
Catcher's rolling his eyes.
Madam Chair, well, we can look into it more, and I can get back to you with a more clear answer. Really, I just need to answer two questions. One, does the statute authorize the board to make rulemaking around this? And I think in some cases it does. I just need to make sure it does specifically on the retention requirement. And then two, is the statute maybe clear in a way that we're not seeing, in which case, we obviously don't want to make a rule. Because really, if the legislature said you can make rules around this and there's ambiguity on how to roll it out, then I think that's something where the board could step in. So I just need to look into it more. And that's something that I don't know if you need to specify in this report or in your recommendations, if you want it in statute or in rule or in policy or whatever. I don't know if the committee needs to get that specific on where it needs to happen, but that's something that we can operationalize.
Right, and I don't think it does. And I guess that's, for me, like, part of that is a timing thing. That's why I'm asking, because there's certain things that need to, so where it can live will matter only in the timing of that. So can we put a pin in it as far as we're saying that the note is that we want to explore
Chairwoman Clark, I would say if the committee wants to explore this and not give a recommendation for whether it's a statute or rule change, then we probably shouldn't add it to this.
Right, that's what I'm trying to get to. Do we not feel like we have enough information to make a recommendation? Do we want to make a recommendation with a caveat that says more exploration and research needs to be done? Or do we want to take it out of the recommendation list? Number one.
First of all, I'd like to ditto what Dr. Cruz says exactly about this. This is a whole huge subject on its own, and we didn't really spend that much time in the last month and a half going into the merits. And I think if we want to do that, we should take it on as a separate subject. And I think that applies to number 3 and number 4, because we don't really have any rationale up there about why we're recommending those items. So perhaps the recommendation for further study would be to evaluate the benefits or the efficacy of the retention policy, and specifically including, how many times a student can be retained and whether or not we can increase the exemption to 3 years, because we're not offering any data or research to substantiate those things, and we would need to. We have to have a reason why we're making those recommendations.
Yeah, and I feel like the way it ties in is we keep coming back to raising the cut score, which will increase the application of this intervention that is very costly and does not have an evidence base to say it's going to work.
That is your interpretation. We don't know that for
I've
sure.
got research.
And there is research that has not been vetted by the whole group. And I just want to keep us to, we're trying to get consensus on.
There's research.
There is research that can sort of, argue for and against. And I just want to be clear. We have not done, to your point, enough to really have a robust conversation and and get into that. And
so, Chair Clark, what I'm thinking is if I can just remove completely from this 2-pager 3 and 4 as a recommendation. And then what I can do is when I create an executive summary sheet for the state board meeting, 3 and 4 will be areas that the committee would like to study if blessed by the board in 2019.
19, yeah.
Yes.
That's basically what I'm reading is where people are. Do we not feel like we have enough? And it could be not just research, but then come back with further discussion and context around those with data and research behind it. The English language learner exemption to 3 years, there was more conversation and more in the field sort of examples of why that was brought up. But I don't want to try to jog anybody's memory, but there was conversation around that. Do we not feel like we have enough to even try that one? Cayenne.
This is from Castro. Can I address that one?
Please. And then Cayenne.
So I don't see the two tied together. I would want to include item 4, and I'm sorry I don't have the line number document. But that it seems that if you get a student coming in who's a pre-emergent student and they're expected to make one level gain every year, it would seem that 3 years exemption would allow them time to acquire English before penalizing them with retention.
That's why. Please decrease it. Cayenne?
What I was going to say, Madam Chair, is that when we're looking at number 3, starting on line 82, we could, and I think we should recommend that we look further into it, but that is going to push that down the road, and we're talking about, I think Heather said it well, when I look at that, I think of kids and kids' faces, and we're going to be dealing with kids who may be impacted by this a second time. And so, when this first came out, we were kind of joking, we're going to have our 12-year-old third graders and our and so we don't want that. We want to limit the impact, I think, to ensure that kids are not being penalized. And I don't want to say that we don't have a research base for this, but we're not sure what this impact is to kids. One time I could say, yes, I could agree with that. But when you are faced with kids that might be retained a second time, or even, God forbid, a third time, that really does not set well with me as an educator.
So could the language, thank you, Cayenne. So could the language, if we were going to keep it in, be about the number of times, we're clarifying that it's about the number of times they can be retained at that third grade marker. Right. Because there are schools that may have made a decision to retain a kindergarten or first grader for other reasons than reading. Right. And what we don't want to do is, now they've been retained, and so they get to third grade, they're at risk, and we've now put something in that makes it so that they can't get the interventions and supports they need if retention is appropriate.
But what we have up there is
right
by the move on when reading exemption. So other reasons could be utilized.
Right. So look at the language here, and let's see if this is in a box enough to get consensus. If it's not, then we'll put it in that research, more exploration parking lot that Alicia's been gracious enough to give us. On number 3, which is line 82 on the screen and line 59 on the document. Audrey.
Here's another way that maybe would accomplish both things. instead of looking just at English learners today, who I believe we do need to look at, and instead of looking at just students who have been retained once or twice already, could we put in a recommendation that we require parent and school consultation, which we do, and decision making, as opposed to a cut score on a test that everyone agrees is inappropriate? I mean, we're looking at that cut score, but we're continuing to use it to apply retention. I'm so uncomfortable with using a test that we're not sure what it's measuring to prescribe an intervention that we're not sure is going to be effective, or if it's going to be harmful to a student. And if we're able to explore ways that we might make revisions to this policy, I would think an easy way to encourage schools to keep having the conversations that many of you have talked about, where teachers and parents are talking about children and whether or not they should be retained or not. Because it doesn't, the way it happens in the schools, as those of you who are in schools know, is that these conversations start early and they go all through the year. And by the time we get AZ merit scores, we're not going to promote a student that we have been talking with a parent about retaining all along the way. And we better not be retaining a student that we haven't been talking to a parent about all along the way, because that probably would be a result of the one bad test day. So I guess what I'm saying is, instead of looking just at English learners today or just at this example or that example, can we put in something that says, make a recommendation that as we explore cut scores and assessments, that we also are recommending that retention should be with the review and permission of parents and schools.
So Audrey, I hear what you're saying. Part of me struggled about halfway through because so much of that is already in policy. And I think what's hard for some of you as we're looking at these, we're only looking at the new additions or recommendations. We're not looking at how that fits into the overall existing policy. Because that is, I remember from our previous ad hoc, that is one of the things that has to be in consultation with the families. And at a certain point, what you're really opening up is sort of a free-for-all if you're removing the cut score mechanism. Right. And I think that opens up a whole new set of issues that we aren't prepared to solve today. So you might disagree with me. And so, unless I hear a number of other members echoing that they'd like to proceed in the way that you're suggesting, I think we're going to have to move on.
Okay.
I'm looking around. It's okay if we want to have this debate, we can have this debate. It's absolutely fine, but I don't want to spend a lot of time if we've got a majority of consensus on this, and we just need to be thoughtful, and I appreciate your comments, Audrey, I really do. But I think we need to also understand our mandate and our mission for the committee.
Can I move on? So going back to line 82, I really feel that we need to put something in there that I agree that maybe we need to research more in the future about retention and what happens with it. But in the meantime, being able to put in there something more about putting once under the move on when reading law or something, because right now it's very... we have this conversation at the school all the time, is how many times can the child be retained? We have one that was retained this year. I'm like, and the conversation is, can he get retained again? And we're all like, I don't know. So I would like something in there that really says like once or something, because I think we took it out. We had something in there, but we took it out.
Language that limits the number of times a student can be retained.
But what is that number of times?
Be limited to once?
Just hit undo.
Under the Mauer. Yep.
Are we still removing these as recommendations as indicated in the feedback?
I'm sorry, say that again.
Are we still removing these as recommendations for 3 and 4 as suggested in the feedback? Okay.
No, I think we're trying to get consensus to keep these in. And we can wordsmith the, it would be
recommended.
revise language in the existing move on when reading policy to limit the number of times a student can be retained at the end of third grade to no more than once?
Yes.
Madam Chair, can I
Sorry.
humbly suggest clarifying?
You can
clarify the language.
Clarifying, because I think what sort of spawned this was ambiguity from the field on how often this is required, and I think clarifying, that might be the operative word.
So no more than once is not clear enough?
No.
No, he said the purpose.
Oh, clarifies for us. Sorry. I thought you were telling me I was being too vague.
No.
No, clarified language.
You were being incredibly specific.
And I was like, greater than 0 and less than 1? Clarify. Okay.
Language.
Clarify language. And then I would maybe remove exemption because it's not really about the exemption at this point. Or just to the move on when reading policy.
Mm-hmm.
To limit the number of times a student can be retained by, and then I think it is by the end of third grade, or at the end of third grade, because it isn't by third grade.
Right.
Right.
That.
Of.
End of
To
third
know,
grade.
I think I said not more than once, but if you have better language, that's what Ketcher said.
That's a dangerous process.
So limit the number of times that student can be retained at the end of 2 once.
But by the end of third grade. So that encompasses the K-3 years as opposed to just at the end of third grade. I'd say by the end of third grade.
Are we saying the same thing? I want to make sure.
You're saying that students should not be retained any more than once between K-3 for Mauer reasons.
That is not actually what I was saying. Because in theory, someone could be, because of the reading.
Right, because of Mauer.
Yes, because of reading. Yes, I'm okay with that, sorry.
Yeah, they can be retained for other reasons.
Okay.
Do we want by or at?
We want by or at.
Versus.
Well, at says something different.
So you want by.
By implies K-3. At says at the end of third grade.
Okay.
By.
By. I think we're. Okay.
So, Chair Clark, Dr. Cruz, so if you have a first grader in which you retain because they're pretty far back with reading, then that student can also not be retained in third grade.
That is correct. Not for Mauer reasons. Not if we changed it.
That's what's making me a little nervous.
You're introducing a new concept here because Mauer does not address retaining kids before third grade. So I think you need to stick with what we're at. It talks about the third grade retention only.
Grade.
Okay,
I got you. At the end of third grade?
So we need to change it to
Okay.
Now
I
got
you.
Third grade. Yeah.
Clarify the language.
So you have. Yeah, there. Yes, perfect.
Okay. Yes.
Everyone okay with that? Read it again, absorb it. We're going to move on though, to the next one and see if we can get clarity. I know, and we can also absolutely note your dissent. I'm very comfortable with that. If that is something you would want to do, and we would just ask you to sort of let us know that. But do we have a consensus? And I'm looking people in the eyes on keeping this in as a recommendation with this language as it is on the screen.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. All right.
Downloads.
Then we're going to move on to go back to add language in to line 84 on the screen around the ELL exemption, which is really just a change from 2 to 3 years. So that is the change.
So it's not adding language, it's changing.
It's adjusting, yes. It's revising the language to increase, right. So let's change, on line 84, Alicia, can we change add to revise?
Thanks.
I'm going to give us a 5-minute break here after we get this one down. Okay. So can we say revised language in Mauer policy that increases the ELL exemption to 3 years from 2? What does everybody think of that?
It's an improvement.
Based on Dr. McMillan's comment, I think it's the same principle.
What's that?
Address something now in the interim and recognize that further exploration could or should occur.
Okay.
Okay. Any concerns language-wise? Can we consider this? Okay. So what we're going to do, if it's okay with you, Alicia, can we take a 5-minute break? As we're halfway through. So we're going to give the committee members 5 minutes. You can check emails, do whatever you need to do. I know where I'm going. And then we're going to come back and keep on trucking.
Plugging away.
Oh, we're going to revisit because I made us take us. Are we okay with the folks on the phone? Everybody's ready to come back together? All right. Then we are on the screen. We are moving down to line 90 on the recommendation around additional funding.
86.
It's line 90 on the screen and 66 on your pages, I think.
Okay. Issue 2, it says 86. Issue 2.
We're ignoring the issue. We're talking about the recommendation.
Oh, okay. Oh, right.
We start with our recommendation, and then we back it up by what issue we're addressing.
Okay.
I have a suggestion, especially in reference to the next recommendation. I don't think it was really clear that this one was about funds to ADE. So these are state level funds at the administrative level, and the next recommendation has to do funding to the schools. I didn't think we were clear enough here.
So your recommendation is you would like to add in the words, the Arizona Department of Education?
Yeah, additional funding to the ADE.
To ADE to provide state supports to the highest need?
To provide more robust state supports to all schools, not just the highest need, but to all K-3 schools. So we're just making the case that there's insufficient funding.
We're making the case that there's insufficient funding, but I do believe that and correct me all if I'm wrong, that the conversation prior in previous meetings was about the highest need or targeted, that it was about being intentional about where the funding goes.
That's fine.
Okay.
I'm not going to fight
Can
that.
I just suggest, though, where it says rural and high poverty, so we wouldn't want to make an assumption that all rural schools and all high poverty schools will be the highest need. So could we just say highest to support schools demonstrating the highest needs, which may in fact be rural and high poverty, but we can't assume that.
Yes,
that's a good point.
Yeah,
that's fine.
And I think I had in my notes I said that it should be intentional technical assistance given to LEAs based on data and prioritized by need. Would that wording be something that everybody would be okay with? Because for me that calls it out and is exactly what ADE would want to be doing, and it gets to that point of the need for data to help us drive where that supports go. Did you capture that, Ketcher?
I think so. Give me a shot. Members, how does that look? Additional funds to ADE to provide additional state supports based on data and prioritized by need.
Do we like the word state supports, or do we prefer technical assistance?
I would like to say to provide more robust state support.
And technical assistance.
And technical support.
I feel state supports is a little vague.
Yeah, and technical assistance. Well, you're putting a lot of more detail below.
But ADE's role in getting the funding is to provide technical assistance.
Some people don't know that.
Right, but we're making the case that the existing funding is inadequate to fulfill that role.
Say that again, I'm sorry.
We are making the case that the current funding level is inadequate to fulfill that role adequately.
Right, I just think, and maybe it's just me, I just feel like technical assistance has to be called out, and state supports doesn't do that.
State support and technical assistance. Why not just say based on need rather than get into based on data and prioritized by need? It's just based on need.
Data needs to be there to say that's how you identified the need.
Okay.
Because otherwise I could maybe make a case for why I was needier than you.
Cried harder.
And it helps us in making the case for the portal funding support some more. How are we on the such support could include? Anybody have any comments, corrections, suggestions in any of those bullets?
In the last bullet, I would like to replace that word audit. It feels like it's a fiscal thing.
I did monitor.
Monitor.
I made that in my note. Does that fit there? I had that same reaction.
Yeah.
Did I see Cayenne?
On the first one, the reading coaches
Line.
and specialists. I'm sorry.
Help catch her out
69
here.
Oh, no, 893. Instead of saying could be dispatched, just say reading coaches and specialists to provide on-site professional development.
Good idea.
Good. Fewer.
Hey, we're taking some words out.
I'm wondering if we have to spell out that it'd be great to have dedicated funds to enhance the functionality of the portal. I know we've got build online resources, but I'm really, and I don't. When we talk about analysis of the outcomes and practices, we're really talking about a much more capable portal system that does the analysis rather than dumping it into an Excel spreadsheet, which is what we did with the research guy we hired. So,
Couldn't that be part of the comprehensive assessment system?
it could. I just wanted to know if we're asking for money, if we need to say we want
true.
to.
I think
agree.
you want it there.
I think
And
I
think
want it
your
back at the
point-
assessment
No, I
system?
think you want it
I
here.
agree.
I think you want it there.
Enhancements
think
to the existing
Right.
portal system to be able to collect.
Improvements and enhancements to the existing data portal system to blah, 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 blah.
To provide analysis. How about
Right.
that? So bullet point number 2.
To
Allow
provide
for,
analysis,
to allow for
Yeah.
analysis.
Yeah.
Because that was the problem.
Enhancement.
At
What did you
both
say?
the local level
Enhancements
and
to
the
the.
state.
What was it?
Portal system.
The data portal system to allow for analysis of outcomes.
Members, I'm sorry, were we thinking about that in the second bullet point, lines 95 and 96?
Yeah.
As a trailer to...
No, precede analysis.
Precede.
Precede analysis. Oh, our typing has gotten so bad.
Enhancement of the portal system.
I'm just trying to see if it fits with the lead in.
Enhancement to the data portal system to allow,
The analysis of.
yeah. And then you could say analysis of outcomes and practices so that effective practices can be effective practices across various student populations can be identified. So take
think
to
it says
identify
that.
out so that, yeah.
I think you just say to identify, right?
I think it's
Right.
Yeah, but it was sort of a run-on before, wasn't it? Anyway, you guys can wordsmith it. Smith it. Do we need to put in a percentage on line 99?
Yes. If we're going to.
Chair Clark, members of the committee, would it be beneficial to the committee if we aligned that identify and monitoring the bottom blank percent, if we align that with school improvement?
What percentage is that?
It's bottom 5.
It's usually the bottom 5%.
depends on what level you fall into.
Now, comprehensive support schools are the bottom 5%, and then targeted, and that ends up setting the cut for targeted. Yeah.
And the other thing, do we feel like this is necessary? I mean, other states do this, and that was part of one of the reasons why I thought it might be a valid recommendation. But if we feel that, I mean, this is the time to either whittle it down or keep it and refine it.
Chair Clark?
Yes.
I would advocate to keep it. I would also advocate for the contrary, to identify the top 5% of performing schools with the highest proficiency rates to look at best practices and see how we can replicate those programs.
Mm-hmm. Can we?
I don't know.
It's just so demographics is such a factor in this. So
part of my intention was that the reason to identify and monitor, and what other states who do this, then they make sure that supports and technical assistance go to these schools to help.
Right.
Right. So that's the reason to have it in. I think the argument on the highest performing is about learning from them, and that for me is included in the research and the data analysis.
I'm good then.
So for me, that's why I didn't make that recommendation. So does that make sense? And again, how are we getting? Are we moving towards a consensus on this bottom one, or are we far away from even keeping it? I'm okay with either.
So back to the language of demonstrating highest need, I feel like without knowing, again, I don't like that hard cut, because there might be someone in the 6th percentile who needs support, or there might be someone, like, we don't know what our capacity to support will be. Can we?
We deleted the highest need language. There's a line through it.
Just prioritized by need.
We're not defining.
We're not defining the need.
Based on data and prioritized by need.
Which line? Sorry.
Line 91. There's a period after need there, and then the rest is deleted.
Got it. Well, can we insert based on need instead of identifying a hard percentage without knowing what our funding will be, what our capacity will be to support, et cetera?
I don't think we're advocating that we only serve those in the bottom 5%. I think this is to say that we monitor them and learn what they're doing so that we see where the issues are and we can ensure
supports
are going there. We're not saying those are the only ones we're going to serve. Mm-hmm. That takes care of that in line 91, that we may serve people who have 40%, right. People have 50%.
Right now, we're not doing that, monitoring or even identifying. And so it was to, again, leverage the resources that we're asking to be allocated to learn, and also those are the data is showing that those are where the highest number of minimally proficient, not just
everyone else has left the call.
So this would accelerate our outcomes if we can really identify what their issues are and provide the technical assistance to them. So it is not a...
Chair Clark, at one time we talked about the chronic lowest performers.
That's the minimally proficient.
Yeah, well, no, what I meant is the concept was that in the existing system, every year you get the same amount of money regardless of how your scores are. So, and we were thinking, well, is there a way we could influence that? So something that says, if you fall into this lowest level 3 consecutive years, then we're going to force you to take state supports. And that's what the minimum literacy plan was about. Maybe I'm a singular person on this, but the idea was, what's the stick we have here? What's the influence that so that these chronic performers, we can address that and help them improve?
So Chair Clark, Member Walburn, maybe just a little background or some more knowledge is that Member Ruff was talking about comprehensive and targeted support, which is federal school improvement. Mm-hmm. There's also state school improvement statutes that govern through an accountability system. Mm-hmm. And so while it's not a percentage per se, it could link the identifying and the monitoring of those schools that are underperforming through early literacy and the Move On When Reading team at the department could link with the school improvement group at the department. And so there's just a concise and clear. I lost my train of thought.
So we're leveraging all resources available.
Yes, yes. Where we're talking about like professional development.
Established minimum, could we do something like on line 100, an established minimum literacy plan enhancement? Well, maybe it wouldn't go there, but I'm just sort of getting to that. The lowest proficiency rates. It's such a run-on, that's the problem. Sorry. But if we wanted to insert, the intent is to leverage additional Move On When Reading funds and to not just link, but to leverage all resources available to help with the outcomes for these schools.
That's just good practice. Do we need to put that in policy?
Right, that's what I guess well, the policy part was right now we are not identifying or monitoring and allocating resources based on their Move On When Reading.
So why don't we add a bullet that just says we need to further investigate how this can, like in a possible collaboration with activities under the school improvement program. No? Okay.
Because they only monitor federally.
Right.
Okay, so let's not do that.
Right.
See, once again, I don't know.
I'm just looking for a place, because I think what you're saying, Alicia, is that we could try, with the intent to leverage all available resources. Where could we put that in that bullet that would make sense and not...
Well, I think that dilutes what we're asking for, though. When we're talking about it, we're asking for additional funds.
Right.
So let's not refer to other funds out there.
So for me, the most important part, to your point, is that we start to get intentional about where are significant issues in schools that are having trouble, and how do we get them more supports?
Right, exactly.
Around reading and Move On When Reading in particular. So for me, that's what that bullet was, and that is how other states are using this. And then they are monitoring, trying to move, and so they may take 3 years, and then they're out, and then other schools are in that would get those. So it's not you stay in there and you're...
Right, so to member Ref's point, I think the idea was to sort of identify a group of schools. Let's say it's 100 schools, whatever percentage it was, and to say we're going to focus on these 100 and get them out of the bottom, whatever it takes. And then next year we're going to take another 100 and get them out of the bottom. So yeah, there's a lot of need out there, but how do we isolate the bottom performers and start moving them up the track?
That's what we're asking for.
I think that was the idea behind the percentage. It wasn't to say that there aren't other schools that need help.
Right. Yeah. There was actually, originally in the recommendation, it was, because again, I used other states that do this, it was actually a number.
Yeah.
It was the 100 schools, I think, or 300 schools, because I think I used the Florida model.
What's the 5% of our schools?
Sorry.
That'd be about...
that would be around 60 schools.
Yeah.
And Chairwoman Clark, Member Wellborn, Sean Ross can correct me if I'm wrong. When we look at targeted and comprehensive support, there's a lot of alternative schools that fall into that, correct?
Sure.
So we want to be real specific. Those alternative schools they may be serving K-3 students.
No, they're high schools.
Well, there are some alternative schools.
There are very few, though.
Just throwing it out there that
there are some.
Can I just, my only, this is not a big issue for me, but I was just suggesting that until we know what the funding will be, maybe we don't want to draw such a hard line on who we're going to serve, because we don't know what your capacity will be to serve that.
Well, let's ask for a big number and see if we get it. Let's ask for 100 schools. Because I think that's what's going to come back. Well, how much do you need?
Right.
So we'd have to go to Sean and say, well, we wanted to do 100 schools. What would it cost?
I mean, I'll go out on a limb here. If we're not serious about trying to help the LEAs that are struggling the most with third grade students, then what's the point? Right?
No, I think we need to be bold.
And that's where, if I'm not seeing something, and again, this is where I look to my LEA friends to, what am I not seeing that, like, how would that not be something we want to do?
So I would just say, like, from a self-interest point of view for our district, I would be thinking, is that additional money, or is that money now coming from my per pupil allocation that I'm already trying to use to help?
We're saying additional funds. It's under the additional funds.
So, and that's not going to offset any other funds in this policy that, no.
I think
we're going to get more money in Arizona.
Well, that's what
we have to ask for it, and we have to make a
Remember
case
Wilmer
for it. But if
people
we start to get so sort of
asking.
not, if we keep thinking about the world that we live in now and the sort of lack of resources, and we aren't going to make a strong enough case for why we need more money.
Right.
And this is actually one very concrete of, look, we want to lift up and move these schools that are struggling because they don't have enough. Right. And we want to provide ADE with the support so that they can help them. And we've seen this work in other states, that they're moving them out of that bottom number count. For me, that's what that's about. I think it's good to hear your lens, Audrey, and go, like, let's clarify. But for me, it's very clear that it's about additional funds to do that, not supplanting with other.
Right.
Okay, so language-wise, anything else on that, or can we say? Do we want to say 5%? Do we want to say the hundreds, the 100 schools? I mean, percentage or count?
Say 100 schools because they'll probably think it's 5%.
Right.
We'll
10% is 125.
What's that?
10% is 125.
10%.
It's 125 schools.
Mm-hmm.
10%.
Say 10%.
I'm good.
10%.
Ask for more. Ask for as much as
Okay.
you
You can always say no, but it's
More
good.
than you think you can get.
All right, so we're gonna.
I mean, so how many of our, Sean, how many of our schools do you think have less, are in the 56% or really high poverty, low proficiency area? How many of what's the
What's your
total
question again?
population of schools that need this service?
So there are 1,255 LEAs or schools in the state that serve K-3 students.
Right.
I off the cuff, I don't know what percent, would need. I'm not
Isn't
sure
that
how you're
interesting?
defining.
We actually have that on Maplit's data. We actually show where the schools are and what percentage, who falls under that, and we could tell you. I don't have it at my hand.
Statewide, you can figure out what that number is?
Have the number of schools that are under that.
Mm-hmm. Is it half?
It is actually probably right around there, or maybe slightly above.
Yeah. So that, yeah.
That's the scattergram. So
if we did
I don't know
100
that
a year,
off the top of my head,
theoretically, it
but-
would still take us 6 years.
Right. Okay, so we're going to move on with, we're going to we plugged in the 10%, Catcher caught that, thank you, and we're going to move on.
Rolling along.
All right.
I'm sorry, Madam Chair. I
Uh-oh.
don't mean, I know before we're about to move on. I just maybe this is just for me, just for clarification on line 99. We're talking about the lowest proficiency rates. Are we talking about third grade reading proficiency?
Yes.
Okay. That was just for me.
So we should probably
That's
put
good,
third
Catcher.
grade.
Probably
Right.
important.
Lowest third grade proficiency.
Third grade.
That's a good point.
Yes.
Yeah. All right. Moving on to the line 109, recommendation about, again, additional funding to, this is to schools, and do we want serving a greater proportion of students far below proficiency, or do we want to say minimally proficient because that is currently the terminology that we use?
I like the idea of keeping it below. I would hate for us to tie it into a label for a tool that we may not be using in the future.
Okay,
So
good point.
think
I
let's
forgot about that.
Use a descriptor for a performance.
Okay.
Chairwoman Clark, members of the committee, just to clarify this section, as we know, the Early Literacy Grant Fund is set to expire, right? So do you want to be clear in this recommendation that you're recommending that the early literacy grants be renewed?
That would be more accurate.
That would be great.
Reviewed or extended?
Renewed.
Sorry.
Or-
Okay. Yes, I think it should actually.
So with
May I?
that's
Hold
just
on one
to the highest high poverty schools, 90% above. So how many schools does that impact? 100?
We actually have that number for you.
I don't think we should even talk in that way, just to respectfully. I think that if you're going to talk about, you need to talk about the funds, and then, what would we do? We could set a limit. We could not set a limit.
We could redefine.
Right, that's what I'm saying. I'm not sure what you said. The fact that the early literacy grant is retiring is an opportunity for these things we're asking for to be funded. That's one possible source. So the question is, should we continue to use that one, or do we think that we can spread those dollars across a larger group of schools based on needs other than poverty level?
If I can just interject just for a second, I just want to clarify something, that statutorily, the early literacy grant is going away. So we would have to ask the legislature to renew those grant funds.
Isn't that what she was asking?
Renew the grant funds, could we also say, and revise it to, and then define what we want them to be used for?
Revise the criteria. So how about renew and reallocate to the Mauer program too?
Again,
getting what you're.
So we have two recommendations around money. One, we're saying more money for the ADE, one more money for the schools, and schools is defined by all those with far below proficiencies, not defined by poverty rates, right?
Right.
So if we renew the early literacy grant, we created a third pool of money, and I'm trying to simplify.
I think we were saying that it's actually that is what we're talking about.
Right.
So
I'm just saying simplify it. Let those $12 million that are over here come over into the one or two of these other buckets, rather and
so
reallocate
those
reallocate it.
Reallocate. So renew and reallocate.
Instead of provide
those funds.
additional funding,
well,
are we going to put that there? Renew and reallocate.
No, I'm not suggesting we renew the early literacy grant program.
Oh, I see.
May I?
I'm suggesting that those $12 million be reallocated in some way. So maybe it goes to,
But they're not going to exist. So do we need the language of renew? Because otherwise you can't reallocate something that's gone away.
So I'm not understanding.
Am I right or am I wrong?
You want to start from scratch?
No.
Okay.
So you're suggesting renew? Okay.
You have to, because right now it is eliminated after this budget year.
Okay.
That's what
you have to get it back into the budget cycle.
Okay. I feel like this is an opportunity for us to recommend that the entire K-3 program funding be looked at, and in its inclusion of the K-3 funding grant, the early literacy grant, and the dollars, whether it's $9,000 a student or $4,500 a student, being allocated to retention, aligned to that statewide incoming kindergarten assessment. That is what we talked about, that right now we have a per pupil allocation. Everyone gets sprinkled with the same number of dollars, whether they're at risk or not. And so part of the use of that universal screener upon entry into kindergarten, where are the students that need support, and either reallocating the K-3 funding altogether or looking at new funding that's available as this early literacy grant expires to provide, whether it's backpack funding or, however we want to do that, so that the funds are going to the students at need. And if it's a school that has 100 kids at need, they get the funding. And if it's a school that has 0 kids at need, they don't get the funding. So I feel like this is our opportunity to talk about linking to that state assessment in order to target resources to need.
I'm a little concerned if we get too much in the weeds about money allocations, we're stepping on the toes of the legislature, which is really their purview. Mm-hmm. I think we're just, where we can stop is say, we want new funding to do this. And whether they want to link it to this or that is, I'm afraid it makes it more complex. I'd rather just have untethered money that allows us to implement what we're recommending.
So are you saying untethered money that's not targeted to need?
No, I'm saying it's right now there's an existing funding stream of $142 per student regardless of need. And so we had a discussion at one point about addressing that and that And I think pretty quickly we heard from the group that that's such a sensitive, the idea of redistributing those existing funds was a no-go place, because it's just nobody wants to give up any money they already have. So now we're just talking about a new source of funds that are going to be tethered to the goals that we're outlining here, not to a universal test or to whatever we decide. So let's say they allocate $15 million to the state, then there would be work that would say, okay, we're going to use it for X, Y, and Z. So I'm just saying in the ask, leave it fairly open until we get farther down the process if there is going to be some new funding available.
And part of, I think, what we were trying to make was a compelling case that at the moment, Move On When Reading dollars are allocated and distributed K-3, how many students do you have, that's how much you get. Mm-hmm. We were making a case for additional funding to be intentional around those schools that have the higher number of students far below proficiency. Mm-hmm. So that's a reason why we're giving the legislature a reason to allocate more funding, because they need more resources to meet the needs of their existing students that they have. That was my intent. If that's not what you're reading on the page, then we can address it. But that was
I agree and have the same understanding that both of you just communicated. But what I also heard was that there is reluctance, or this idea that circulates that around maybe a particular ideology that says, why should we give more money to schools who are not producing the results that we would want them to? And so I think that what that argument misses is how students arrive to our doors on day one of kindergarten, before fingers can get pointed at, well, you didn't do your job, so you don't really need more money. I think it's a really good, clear lever for us to use to say, look, the need is not the same from school to school. Let's use that screener to see how students are arriving upon entry into kindergarten as a way to target our resources for support.
I agree.
What is the language we're suggesting then?
No, I don't think she's suggesting additional language.
That's what I'm
just
trying to
rationale, right? I mean, it's just...
Okay. So in the issue...
I fear that it will be dismissed unless we talk about we want more money for students that we use in assessment to target and identify where they are as they come in the door for the very first day.
Totally get you. I just want to make sure that that is really not an edit to the recommendation. It is a clarification on the issue of why we're saying this is important, and we can capture that.
Remember, Ref, we actually already have that in there. So going back to recommendation 1, such a system would yield baseline data for all students entering kindergarten and facilitate early identification in students needing intervention. And we can elaborate that, but that's exactly what you're talking about. We're identifying the need.
Yeah. So I think we have it, and we will make sure
target
that
the resources.
Okay. So the only other suggestion I would make is line 113. I don't think we need that bullet.
Yeah, I agree.
Additional support from ADE.
Yeah.
And I don't think anyone, because we've covered that in the previous recommendation.
Did we want to add the renew, the early childhood?
Renew the what?
Yep, Madam Chair, we haven't actually come to an agreement on the language, I think, for the early literacy grants, and I think we had some discussion about renewing and reallocating, I think is where we left off. I didn't start writing anything because it seemed like we were still formulating, and then we moved. So I think maybe that's...
So we could do one of two things. We can add in the language about renew and reallocate, provide additional funding, or renew and reallocate early literacy grant funding. We can scratch provide additional funding and just include renew and reallocate early literacy grant funding to be
so
used
we're asking for more than the $12 million, right?
We can. That's what I was trying to do.
So I think we need to make that clear. So you want to.
That's what I'm saying is.
Want to renew the early literacy money and ask for additional monies. Let's be clear.
Provide additional funding and in addition.
Over and above renewing early literacy grant funds.
Yeah.
Two schools.
Early literacy out of there altogether. I don't know.
Well, you could do a
Not
semicolon.
grants anymore, isn't it? Just the
Put it
early
in.
literacy program funding.
Renew and reallocate to move on when
Provide,
And then
provide
choose-
additional assistance, additional funding to schools serving a greater population of students.
You got to talk a lot slower
Wait a
than
minute,
that.
wait.
Oh, he just needs to copy and paste
Right.
109 now. Right?
Well, do we
No.
want and additional?
Wait,
I think it's and. It's
Okay.
not to provide.
Yeah,
It's
it's
renew and
provide.
reallocate the early literacy program funding
and renew.
and
And
provide
renew and
additional
reallocate.
funding.
Yeah, there
So-
we go.
Yes.
And it's the rest of the.
Additional funding, and then wouldn't this be the point where it says enrolling and serving a greater proportion of students entering kindergarten far below readiness benchmarks?
I don't think you define it there.
As we were saying, reallocate it, we would need to talk about how we're doing that. And I know it's in recommendation 1, but I think we need to connect the dots here.
You want to instead?
Then board rule, though.
What's that?
I think that would be board rule. So, member rep, what was your recommendation? You're adding another bullet under at 115?
So it says renew and reallocate the early literacy program funding and provide additional funding to schools serving a greater proportion of students far below proficiency. Again, I'm just leery of
Students with highest needs?
Serving a greater portion of students.
entering kindergarten,
Just put highest needs, and that's to be assigned.
highest needs.
Let's just say to students with the highest needs.
Well,
That's what she's advocating.
yeah, you're advocating one thing, and the far below proficiency is advocating. I'm trying to kind of get in the middle. Like you could say, I identified as at risk or far below proficiency, and you can identify it in kindergarten that they're at risk.
But they're also going to be could possibly be at risk in 1 and 2 as well.
Yes.
So I don't want to limit.
Why you don't need to clarify? It's just for one grade. You just leave it.
Right.
So I'm
You would
saying,
leave it,
if you
yes.
say identified, so serving a greater proportion of students identified at risk or and or far below proficiency.
What's the difference?
At risk, it's, I guess for me, it's in kindergarten. How are you? It's very difficult to identify that they're below proficiency, but you can identify that they're at risk.
Yeah, but we're experts, or you guys are all experts in this, and the rest of the state board members and the audience of stakeholders, I don't know that they really know the difference of those two things.
Right, but if this is going to be turned
pretty
into
important.
a statute language, it's an important distinction.
I understand that. I'm
And
just
it gets
trying
to
make it a
yours
clear
and
piece
gets
of
to
communication.
the K3. You could also say K3.
Yeah, greater proportion of K3 students far below or identified at risk.
For reading. For reading proficiency.
Let me just make a clarification from Member Wellborn, is that we don't have an assessment that identifies far below proficiency until 3rd grade. So that's why we say identified far below or at
highest
risk.
needs. Identified at risk or far below proficiency. Right.
Because we're going to have a statewide kindergarten assessment, right? At the beginning, a screener.
K3. We're going to have a comprehensive K3
You don't wanna
assessment
use
that
that
could
to
do
make
any of
this-
that, but we don't have it now. So
Okay, we got
I'm
25
trying to leave
minutes,
the language
ladies.
enough to give us some
Mhm.
captures of. So I'd have to understand what is the what's the heartburn on identified as
Sure.
at risk.
Chair Clark, if I may, based upon Member Ruff's just last comment, I do want to make it clear to this committee that the state legislator may not implement any of these recommendations, and so that has to be a realization of this committee. And
Correct.
they
Well,
may
we're in
not
the
do it
clouds.
next session, and they may not. They may not.
They may not take any of
We
our
know that.
recommendations. No, that is a reality check that we needed. And
Don't be raining on our parade.
Way to take the buzz out of the room.
Don't be raining on our parade here.
But right now, our charge was to recommend what we feel are going to be significant levers to bring us the outcomes to get us to these ambitious yet attainable goals that the state has set for ourselves. And so we are, but we also have to always be developmentally appropriate and not box ourselves into a corner. And that was what I was trying to do with at risk and proficiency, including both, kind of gets you.
Chair Clark,
there.
If I just may add one little thing, serving a greater proportion of K-3 students far below proficiency and or identified at risk.
Sure.
Perfect. Can I just address item 105, starting up there? I don't know that that issue clearly communicates what we're trying to say. I think the point is that the existing funding at the school level is inadequate.
Not enough.
It's not enough. So I'm not sure that is the issue. So I think how can we illustrate that this doesn't really say that.
So why don't we try to capture what you just said instead of so in issue 3 on line 105, existing
funding from Maurer and early literacy grants.
Or Chairwoman Clark, Member Wellborn, you could state the issue that the early literacy grant is expiring, and
okay,
so it's a good opportunity to ask for the reallocation and renewal.
Nobody wanted
let's just capture a couple random thoughts. So it's one with the expiration of the early literacy grants and the high number of percentage of students not meeting proficiency. I'm trying to say instead of it's clear that, but it's not. I don't know if I can go out on the clear that move on when reading funds. Current move on when reading and early literacy grant funds are not do not meet the need. Do not meet to provide the necessary resources to meet the need to serve the high percentage of students not at proficiency.
What's our data behind that?
The 56% not at proficiency throughout the state.
Mm-hmm.
What am I looking at? Line what?
Line 106. Did you want move on when reading and early literacy?
Yeah.
Well,
oh, I see.
Yeah, that's yeah.
I think maybe adding another sentence that, we currently also have an early literacy grant that provides funds to schools that are not, maybe providing a little background on early literacy grant, and however it expires this year.
This is a recommendation, so that's in the body.
This is the issue.
That's the
We're
issue.
explaining
Yeah,
it.
but we've already explained what the early literacy grant is in the body of the report, so we don't need to explain it again.
I don't know about that.
Not in the body, it's in the appendix. So I would say that we could, what if we just start with, there are a high number of students not meeting third grade reading proficiency. Move on when reading and early literacy grant funds are currently not adequate to serve the, what?
Yeah, keep going. Keep fine.
To serve the high number of students falling below proficiency. So we're setting up the case for why we're again making a case to extend or to renew and reallocate and to additional funds. So that's the important part, not that there's this early literacy grant right. Am I wrong? Is that the issue?
No,
the issue is.
But if you read it that way, though, I'm concerned that people will say that Maurer money was intended to pay for these things. Maurer money was intended to pay for reading specialists and intervention programs and benchmarks and blah, 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 blah. So are we? I think we need to make the case that the intent of Maurer was to provide X resources to schools However, the funding levels are insufficient
Right.
to meet those
I think
intents.
that's what we're saying.
Maybe they're not insufficient, but they're not targeted.
Right.
They're not
targeted
distributed
and
to meet the need.
But I think the reality is that we now know that it's not just 56% and everybody's on the bubble. We know 4% of those are minimally proficient. So it is a much bigger lift than we have the resources to meet. So that's the case I think that's going to help to. Otherwise, I kind of agree with you. So can we eliminate that? Yeah, first sentence. And then see if we're getting close, because we want to get to the. If we're close enough, we can revise a little, and you'll see a final version of this, and make sure we captured the issue correctly. But in my mind, is consensus around the importance is that we're making a case for there is a higher number of students falling below proficiency, and we do not have enough resources to meet the needs to serve them to get successful outcomes. No. The wording there. I mean, I'm just I'm just sort of.
It's fine for now, Terry.
Funds are adequate to serve. There was something. She used the word insufficient, and if we want to put that in, that.
So, Sean, do you know what the average size K-3 school is? How many students would be in K-3? Is it like 200 kids?
No, I don't have that data available right now.
There's no way to
It's all
know.
different.
Because if it were 300 kids, it would be $42,000. So the point is, and we've used a lot of words to basically say $42,000 is not enough.
We're basically saying 145 per student is not enough.
Right. That's what okay.
Mm-hmm.
So
if we want to come out and say that.
So the base level funding for Mauer is not adequate to provide enough resources for all kids to
cannot
reach
provide
proficiency.
for reading specialist, program, intervention, all those things. Yeah.
Right.
Something like that.
Right.
That's in the recommendation, I feel.
That was
All
the
right.
issue.
I think that it might be problematic to some people reading these recommendations when we start talking about not adequate or not sufficient, because I think that's subjective.
The data shows it's not adequate.
But we're also not distributing it to need. I think
Can I address that?
That's got to be clear.
Because Mauer-based funding was never, ever intended to be distributed by need. It was intended to be base level funding to help implement new policy and new statute. Mm-hmm. And I just want to go on record saying that we should not ever touch that base level funding because schools don't have enough money in order to do other things. So that's why we're asking for additional funds.
Agreed. And I'm not suggesting take it away. I mean, this is Arizona. We need every penny. But we also need to address the fact that we did not, in the policy logic, wherever the original policy came from, target resources to need.
But what we're trying to do.
Right, but when we say things like it's not sufficient or not adequate, I think you've got to make that link. It's not that schools who are doing fine need more money, right?
Right, which is what in the recommendation is what we're getting at. That we need those schools that need more funding. So let's not confuse. The issue is not the recommendation. The issue is setting up the case for why the recommendation should be implemented. And they shouldn't actually completely restate each other. So I just want to make sure. All right, let us, because we're running out of time here, let us put a pin on that. The recommendations stand. The issue can maybe be refined. We'll come back to you with a draft of that. And then we're moving on to line 131 on the screen, or no, 132, sorry, which is, I believe, the last recommendation. And we are welcoming any thoughts, feedback on this. We admit that this was a challenging recommendation to try to capture consensus because of where we're at with the menu of assessments. But we need to, this was a big part of the committee's conversation, and we want to make sure that we capture that. So
Member Ortiz? I would, thank you, Chair Clark and members. I would like to make the following edits, remove line 1 and start off with, it is recommended that the cut score be raised in association with recommendations above.
So the first sentence you're cutting, I'm sorry.
Yes,
on
cut
line
the,
132?
Cut, yes, line 132 through the first 3 words of line 133.
First sentence you're cutting.
Mm-hmm. And start off, it is recommended that the cut score be raised in association with recommendations above. My reasoning behind this is it doesn't sound strong enough based on how we enter into this paragraph.
I like that a lot because I think we want to communicate that raising the scores without increasing resources and addressing the shortcomings is not going to do anything. They need to go hand in hand. So it's the recommendation, provided the recommendations 1 through 3 are adopted, then it makes sense to raise cut scores.
Correct.
I'd support that too. I like that it makes it stronger and like that it incorporates what you were saying, Member Wellborn, that we are saying if we do this, but we have to do all these other things to provide supports, fundings, and more interventions for our schools.
Madam Chair, Dr. Ortiz, can you just double check me to make sure that I captured what you were trying to get at?
It just made the second sentence duplicative. Catcher, you just needed to wordsmith a little first, but I would get rid of the duplicative sentence that it follows what you just typed.
Instead of in association,
Can I?
along with the adoption.
Audrey, go ahead.
So I guess I'm behind here. So I'm not clear on how we're making a recommendation to raise a cut score on an assessment that doesn't exist, that we don't know what the cut score will be. We don't know what is the purpose of that.
Could we use, so that's a good point, Audrey. Could it be, sorry, did we catch the duplication there?
Madam Chair, yes, we caught it, but I haven't actually started doing it yet because I wanted to allow for
say
the
acknowledging instead of but, acknowledging with the current climate of move on when reading a menu of assessments, discussions on raising that cannot occur until the?
Yes.
So remove but on line 135 and say acknowledging.
And can I also add, I don't think that the cut score is the issue, right? The issue is that we are saying that 2% of our kids are not ready to move on when really 56% are below proficient. So are we talking about like setting criteria for what it means to be proficient, setting criteria for who will be retained, who will be promoted, setting criteria for who will receive interventions, no matter what they are? Like where, I think there's a lot of assumptions there. I feel like this is putting the cart before the horse.
So Dr. Cruz and then Dr. Ortiz, see if you'll answer that for us.
I just want to clarify that the cut score is well below the proficiency mark. So when we say that 56% of our kids aren't proficient, in actuality, it's a whole lot more than that. So that's why I think the discussion around raising the cut score has to be part of our conversation, because it's not okay to leave all those kids behind. We know those kids that fall into the minimally proficient range.
But why isn't that the cut score then?
Well, we're talking about that.
But I guess I'm confused in minimally proficient, and then we have this separate cut score.
Right.
Why?
Well, we're talking about
That's what we're discussing.
Separating the two.
Okay.
So in the prior world, ELA was an approximation that was used to define our reading levels, which we know that's okay. So part of what we're recommending back with a single assessment is that we finally have a single reading assessment, so it's not messed up with ELA stuff.
No, I totally understand the whole thing.
So, but then with a new assessment, if you want to get to the 72% proficiency level, the idea is that we'll have to gradually raise the cut score of determining what is retention. It doesn't have anything to do with minimally proficient or partially proficient, because that's done by, that might be done by a recommendation of this group, but it would be a whole new category and separate from.
But I'm saying that's the whole confusion, is that we're saying you're minimally proficient, and that is not the cut score for receiving intervention.
And here's where I think we're getting a little in the weeds and a little bit technical, when this is what statisticians and folks who really know this stuff can easily iron out. And we can't use terminology on an assessment that we probably won't be using, which would be minimally proficient. But what we have to have and what we need is a cut score. No matter what we're doing, there's going to be a set cut score.
For what?
For
retention.
For retention, right.
That is because we have a statute in place that is about that. And the idea and the vision and the intent of that statute was to make sure that children who are significantly behind get the proper intervention so that they can move through the system successfully. So
I understand.
we're not going to try to rewrite the statute. What we're trying to do is say the process, and that process has been in place, is that always with an assessment that we have a cut score identified and to link to retention.
Mm-hmm. So
now we aren't going to be. We don't have what that's going to be. So we can't set a cut score around something we don't identify. So this language says that what we're going to do is look at, because a significant amount of our students in the current assessment that we're using, we have a cut score that is so low, it's the lowest in the country, that we are letting a significant amount of minimally proficient students move forward and not take advantage of those intensive interventions that they could be getting to improve their outcomes.
Agreed. So, all I'm suggesting is that since we don't know what the assessment is, I think we're all agreeing that there are a lot of kids who have a lot of needs that we're not addressing with our current system. So what I'm saying is that, can we just say we're recommending reviewing and, eventually setting a cut score that will increase the number of students who are eligible to receive Move On When Reading interventions, which may include retention.
Let's capture that.
Because otherwise we're saying, again, like we can do the math, but like $20 million times 7%, $140 million to retain students as an intervention.
So I think if I hear you right, let me just make sure I am. We're looking at the raised language, and you're suggesting instead of raised that we set a cut score that
increases the number of students who are eligible to receive Move On When Reading interventions, which may include retention, but it gives us a window to say we know that we are not identifying all of the students who need support and intervention. We need to study this carefully, just as we're going to study all of the interventions that are available to them.
And my question would be that I want to make sure what we aren't doing is opening up a window where we can make that back to where we started, of as few kids then fall into that category as possible, and we're back to square one. So really look at that language, everyone, because that's my big heartburn.
Chair Clark, can I ask for a clarification from Member Ref? As a former administrator who had to make intervention classes, right? If you're just looking at the students that potentially fall within that retention category in K-3 to provide interventions, and knowing that there's going to be an additional students that fall within that minimally proficient range, are you stating that then those students who fall within the minimally proficient range but do not fall below the retention cut score would not be getting interventions? Because those students are still not proficient and should be getting interventions.
I was confused too, and I don't think you intended
what
that.
I'm saying is that we've talked about the fact that we move students on currently to fourth grade who we know need support, but they're just on the other side of the cut score, right? And the interventions that are available to them are lost at that point. I also hear people saying the cut score is really not communicating the need, how many students are in need of continued support. So all I'm saying is as we revisit and we look at assessments and cut scores and labels of proficiency, that we're thinking about how we accurately communicate who is not at grade level proficiency, who needs support, and which interventions may or may not be available to them. But I think just to say we're raising the cut score doesn't capture the entirety of the issue. The issue is much bigger than just the cut score. We're using labels that are confusing to stakeholders, to parents, to teachers. You know, you're minimally proficient, but you're moving on, you're not moving on. So I agree that we need to reestablish, or we need to establish carefully cut scores in whatever new assessment, and we need to do that in a way that makes sense and that affords intervention to students, whether they end up being promoted or retained in grade.
So can I address this a little bit? So the issue of setting a cut score, right, only applies pretty much this year for AZ Merit. After that, we're into a whole new realm under menu of assessments. And I think going back to our earlier recommendation that we have a single statewide reading assessment for third grade, I think it would be worthwhile to recommend again, remind people that we're recommending to pull out the Mauer reading thing out of AZ Merit and menu of assessments and have it as a standalone diagnostic tool that allows us to target the highest need areas and allocate our funding there. So that's point number one. And point number two is then the cut score would be determined on this new single assessment. And there's going to be a whole body of work around how we do that. And I think a whole nother discussion around if we have a single reading assessment for third grade, how we should use that tool. I mean, maybe you just have above proficient and above, or proficient and below. I'm making this up. I'm just saying.
Tool will define that.
But that's TBD later. So I would think that we're not recommending anything on the AZ Merit cut score this year.
Correct.
But we are recommending a separate tool, and that tool, the cut score, needs to be more aggressively set and used to target resources.
To target interventions which may or may not include retention. So we may, for example, we're not going to retain 42% of kids, right? Right, but it's confusing in terms of saying you're minimally proficient, but you're really far away from proficiency, but you're moving on or you're not.
We're about making a recommendation that is possibly adjusting board rule or statute. We're not about this is how do we make, the community at large understand this, right, at the moment.
Right.
That was when Don Walls came to speak to us. I thought that was part of the issue, is that we have very confused stakeholders. But that's not I'm just saying that when we get a new assessment and when we revisit where labels or cuts or whatever are going to be, how they're going to be set, that we do it in a way that clearly communicates students who need support, and that a cut score is not narrowly defined as who's retained and who's promoted. Maybe some of those students would be retained, maybe some of those students would be promoted, but we need to talk about this in a way that makes sense.
But let's wait to have that conversation to know until after we know we're going to get a new assessment.
Right, and the only reason I bring up now is because it says we will increase a cut score, but we don't know that makes no sense. So if we say we will reevaluate how we identify students at need, which may be an increase, probably will be an increase. Sounds like we're all in agreement that we're not identifying everyone who has need.
I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that I'm a little worried that we're getting in the weeds and we're setting a little bit too much wiggle room for something that is very clear. There's a process in place. A cut score has to be set to be able to implement properly the retention policy.
But right now, the law does refer the cut score to the AZ Merit. So I think that's why we need to be specific here that we're recommending
the statewide assessment.
Right,
it doesn't say AZ Merit, statewide assessment.
Statewide assessment. Okay.
Right, and I don't want to get into revising a statute that we don't want to. So I guess that's why I'm being really careful about some of what you're recommending. and what I thought I heard you say was that we, and I think I'm seeing with consensus is that we have consensus to about the setting of a cut score that means more students are receiving malware interventions that would lead to better outcomes. The reason and again, I would have to pull up the statute, but the cut score is the trigger for the retention, which is the trigger for the interventions. So when you start to parse that, it may be retention, it may be. Am I wrong, Sean? Is that?
The thing I would clarify, Chairperson Clark, Member Ruff, the thing I would clarify is that there's nothing in the legislation that prevents students from receiving interventions at the school. Yeah, it's the school to determine. The legislation says that a student who is retained must then receive.
I guess that's what I mean. Like they would get the targeted
there's nothing in the legislation that prevents other students from receiving it, and the reality is the 4 that are in legislation are commonly used for all students anyway. It's
so I
tutoring
guess what
before,
I'm saying
during.
is that it's already in statute. So and the trigger of the cut score and the retention triggers some very specific intentional interventions. And that is what I don't think we want to monkey with.
Okay, so my final question, and I will let it go, is that given our previous discussion on the need to study retention, how are we saying we're going to raise the cut score to retain more students, although we haven't had that conversation yet, we haven't had that study yet, we haven't looked at the cost or the effectiveness of it?
For me, that's the roadmap for that we would have that chance to do more exploration and understand more.
So I might suggest that we rephrase the issue a little bit. I think the more immediate issue is that there's the issue is that we're looking to the prior practice has been to use an ELA assessment as an approximator for reading, and that's an issue. So let's just put that out there. And the recommendation is we want a specific third grade reading assessment that is separate from.
But we've covered that. Yes.
Okay, I'm just saying that's a 2 point. The second point is that historically there's been a huge disparity between the cut score and the proficiency rate. And if we intend to increase proficiency rates, we need to re-look at being more aggressive on cut scores. Let's just look at it that way.
Let's not use aggressive, but I'm with you.
Or use more effectively use a cut score or something like that.
It's a more appropriate cut score to ensure that students that need the interventions
are receiving
them. And for me, so that's one possibility. I want to, before we frame the issue, I want to make sure that I think, Audrey, we are trying to incorporate your concerns, but I'm hearing consensus on that issue of the cut score needs to properly reflect where we're at as a state and make sure that it is ensuring a system that gets interventions to those that most need it. And am I seeing Kyan left? So she'll be back because I'm sure she's just taking a quick break. But I'm going to look everybody in the eye and I know, again, you've noted, but have we tried to somewhat address, and we will clarify this, but that recommendation wording is what I'm most concerned about now, and then the issue framing we can work on. And we're running behind, and I apologize for us going over the time. So anyone have, with what you've heard right now, if we, with Catcher's help, capture it more clearly, that we would, I don't care if we use the word increase, if we use the raise, or if we say set an appropriate cut score that would ensure that but we need to come to some consensus.
Member Clark and members, the way it is written now, line 133, it is recommended that the cut score be raised. The reason I focus on be raised is currently it's not identifying the students in need. So we're addressing the current situation, and we're saying that it needs to be adjusted in a way that identifies and acknowledges the current climate of giving us the opportunity to, number one, we can't, to Member Ref's point, we can't identify a cut score when we don't have Fed approval on any type of assessment or even identification of assessment. So the
leaving
second
that language,
half of it, yes.
Leaving that language,
follows
and
through.
does the discussions on raising the cut score cannot occur until the direction of the third grade reading assessment, which is what we have in any form, is determined, and that the plans on putting out an addendum from this group on a roadmap for, we could, they're raising cut scores, cut score adjustments.
And I would just add to
setting,
that,
I don't care.
contingent to the addition of the new third grade reading assessment. And maybe that's duplicative.
There, right? Until the direction of.
Okay, I'm good.
So maybe it's moving that it is recommended that the cut scores be raised in association with the recommendation above follows the paragraph, follows the literacy ad hoc committee plans on putting on an addendum to this report with a roadmap of raising the scores. It is recommended that the scores be raised in association with, in other words, we're all the other things.
But we have that.
No, I know, but put it at the end. Put it as recommended that the cut score be at the end.
And I
disagree.
Okay. Only and Member Pulley, only because it wasn't worded strongly enough. The issue is the cut score is too low.
And remember, we're going to refine the issue statement to address the gap, the cut score gap. That's not so. That is going to be the setup for why we're starting with a recommendation that says
it is recommended.
It is recommended to be raised, but we're saying very clearly in the current climate and with the menu of assessments and the discussion cannot occur until we know the third grade reading assessment in any form is determined, and that this committee would plan on issuing an addendum that sets out a roadmap. To me, Audrey, that is where we lay out and we have a chance to then do the research, that we have a chance to sort of say issues and concerns, and then we lay out a guidance on how that could be done, that they can either listen to us or ignore. Aaron, anything on this one? I'm looking at everybody in the eye because this is where, again, I take very seriously, and this group should take very seriously. We are the ones that when these go out, if the board adopts or people are going to come to you and say, hey, I was on the committee and at this end of the day, you have to say, yes, I might have dissented or I didn't agree with this part, but overall I adopted this. We came to consensus. So, having lived through this once, I just want to prepare you all that it's Red Rover. We're together on this.
It's send nobody over. Everybody stays on one side.
We'll run you right over, right?
So that is why I'm beating that. I see consensus on this side. Anyone else? Okay. So we will take the recommendation as it's currently written there, and we are going to try to get you a clear issue statement in the revision draft that you will get. Is that safe to say, Alicia and Ketcher?
Chairwoman Clark, members of the committee, that is safe to say, yes. Okay. I will state that this 3-page recommendation sheet, we would like for this recommendation sheet to go to the board at the December 17th board meeting. Right. Yeah.
And you're so still on track for that.
Yes, but just so the committee knows is that the board materials will go out next week to the board members, and I do like to get the materials out on time.
Do you have a date for that?
The board books typically go out next Wednesday.
What's the
5th?
5th?
The 5th?
No, 4th.
5th?
No, 4th. Is it the 5th?
I think it's December 5th.
5th.
Yes, Wednesday, December 5th.
Because we would like the board to approve it.
Yep.
So that board staff can utilize it within our conversations that we have
So,
into the
and I'm
legislative session.
available tomorrow to help in the issue statements that we promised revisions on so that we can work on that. So, and then.
Sure. I will talk to you offline about
Okay.
my availability.
So did I
If you don't
understand?
have availability, then you just tell me when you are.
Will we see the report in final version before it gets to the board, or no?
That is our
This
hope.
is it. Okay.
That is our hope.
But
Yeah, go
Chair
ahead.
Clark, I just want to make for the record, because this group did build consensus on the recommendations, there will, after you see it, even if you provide substantial feedback, it most likely will not change, even
Really,
if you provide
the only feedback
substantial
is
feedback.
you got this incorrect. Like this word was not what we had in this, what we saw on the screen. That's the feedback we're going to be looking for. It is literally what you saw on the screen is what we approved on tape. And if we got it wrong, that's the time to tell us. Am I correct in that? Okay. Well, on that note, then, again, I appreciate everyone's patience with me, everyone's hard work on this, the review, the very deep and robust and sometimes contentious conversation. This is how we make things better. So thank you personally to every member of this team, and thank you to Alicia, Ketcher, Sean, and Sarah, and Heather's great crew at ADE behind the scenes. So we appreciate everyone on this group, and thank you for your hard work.
And thank you, Terry.
Our next meeting is Thursday, January 10th.
What's that?
Thursday,
Oh, yes, and we have a
January
meeting
10th.
on January 10th because
And
we
those
love each
invites
other
went
so
out
much.
from board staff. You all should have those already on your calendar.
So, yes, and we can continue this work in the new year. All right. Thank you, everybody, and we're adjourned.
Holidays, everyone.
Happy holidays.